Notre Dame fans, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Tuesday now, July 26th. My name's Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher of Irish Breakdown, joined by Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting. But today, Ryan, we're not talking recruiting. Even though there's a lot going on with Notre Dame right now, we are not talking recruiting today. We are going to talk about Notre Dame football. We're going to dive into the Notre Dame team because camp is a little over a week away from starting. It is that time of year, and recruiting has kept up a lot of our attention, but it is time to start focusing in on some Notre Dame football talk. And our topic for today, Ryan, is about the sophomore class, and we're going to focus today on the offense. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the defense. Before we begin, however, I do want to ask people again who have not done so. I just put a link to our new channel that we started at Irish Breakdown. We're trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers, and then we're going to start populating here very soon with content. But it is called CFB Nation. It is the new child of Irish Breakdown and Driscoll Publishing, and we are going to start having some shows and some hosts that are going to talk about college football in general, and they're going to talk about recruiting in general from a national standpoint. Clearly, Notre Dame will be a topic, but it'll be a topic within the bigger framework of what they do. Irish Breakdown is going to remain a Notre Dame channel. So we decided instead of putting some of that stuff on our channel, we're going to start a new one. So we need to get to 1,000 subscribers before we start putting in new content. So I put the link in the chat room so you can see that. It's basically CFB Nation, College Football News and Analysis. Type that in at YouTube. You can find it if you can't use the link or you're listening later and the link doesn't pop up for you. So we would really appreciate your help. We're already over. We launched it, I think, Friday. Ryan, was it Friday?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We're already up to 700 subscribers. We need to get to 1,000 to start the monetization process. Once the hours will be easy. Once we start putting shows out, we'll get to the 4,000 hours easy. It's getting up to those 1,000 subscribers, and we'll have some stuff that'll go up there this week. And we're hoping to have some deals signed here this week to get some talent on to do some of those shows. So that is what we're doing, but that is not the topic of today. So let's move on to today's topic.
Yeah, so the topic of today, as Brian kind of briefly talked about, is we're going to talk about the sophomore class, specifically talking a lot about the offensive side of the football today, because we are of the belief, I know, Brian, we've talked about this a bunch in the past, this sophomore class has a chance to be special on both sides of the ball, but I really think this sophomore class, specifically for the 2022 season, this can really unlock the overall potential, in my opinion, of how good this offense can be. So we want to go every level of this offensive system. We're going to work from offensive line, quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and tight end. And we're going to talk about some of the sophomore players on the Notre Dame roster that we think are just overly important for how good this team can be moving into 2022.
Look, there's two like kind of lines we're drawing to connect the dots, right? And number one is we believe this team cannot take the next step as a program without the offense taking a step forward, right? It's got to get better. That's number one. Number two, if you look at the depth chart, the key positions, you're starting quarterback, left tackle, right tackle, arguably your best returning receiver, and much of your running back depth chart is made up of sophomores, right? So those are some pretty important positions. So you look at it, it's hard for me to think about how Notre Dame can possibly be the program that we think they need to be or can be without the sophomore class really stepping up and becoming a really key part of that. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. It's just this is putting a lot on a young class. And I think this, to me, is arguably the biggest question mark about this football team. It's not the talent. It's not coaching. It's not the schedule. It's not any of those things. It's you're asking a lot of young players to step up and shine. Now, you could easily point to, well, look at Clemson in 2018, and I've done that before. When you talk about they had a true freshman quarterback, a true sophomore receiver, their two best receivers, their two most productive receivers were a true freshman and a true sophomore in Justin Ross and T. Higgins. You had young players all over the defense is part of the rotation. But the difference is again, I'm not asking Tyler. We shouldn't ask Tyler Buckner to be Trevor Lawrence, right? I mean, so you could look at it that way, but the reality is also when you look at the makeup of this team, the talent is there. They're relying on more sophomores than they are freshmen, like the 2018 Clemson team. And when you look at the schedule, I think it's a favorable schedule for Notre Dame to be successful. But again, they just can't do it without this sophomore class. And so without them emerging and stepping up and not just being good players, but the other part of it too, Ryan, is some of these guys can't just be good role players. They have to step into to situations where they need to be dudes. They need to be productive. They need to be difference makers. They need to be guys that in big games step up and make plays. And that's the part to me that is more the question mark. I think the production will be there, Ryan. I think we'll see great play from all these guys at times. The question for me is, will it be against Ohio State? Will it be against BYU? Will it be against Clemson? Will it be against USC? Will it be in the postseason? I think those for me are the bigger question marks because of the youth.
And it's a great question. I think one reason that we have such high expectations, though, for this team is that, I mean, Brian, it seemed like an unordinary thing. For one, for people that like to look, just kind of look at other screens as far as what we're talking about, go to the 2021 recruiting class because that's the class that we're going to be breaking down a little bit. But for me, Brian, it was the fact that we saw guys like Joe Alt in this past season come in and have such a big role into this team and have a guy like Tyler Buchner in spurts, seeing what he can do, and the running backs and Lorenzo Styles. Some of the guys that we're talking about today, we don't usually see those guys make instant impacts as freshmen, right? And I think that's what gives us such high expectations. At least it felt like there was usually you'll have one or two guys that play a bit as a freshman and make an impact, but it just seemed like there were so many more guys that had opportunity last year, which I think gets you excited for what they can make the jump from freshman to sophomore, because that is one of the bigger jumps that a player is going to make is from freshman to sophomore year. A complete year under the coaching staff, under the strength and conditioning staff, all those great things. And I think that you're right. Can Tyler Buchner, and I know we'll get to him more in depth, can he be the guy in 2022 that we think he can be overall, or close to it, closer than maybe a usual jump would be? You're depending on guys at quarterback, offensive tackles. Those are the most important positions of the offense. I mean, because you could argue running back, you can cycle in some guys and kind of find some mismatches, do all that type of thing, but you can't hide quarterback and offensive tackles. You can't do it.
The other thing too, Ryan, is running back and receiver are positions that in my opinion are not ones that necessarily require great experience to be effective. The difference, and we'll dive into the specifics of the players here in a minute, but the positions you talked about, quarterback, offensive tackle, especially in a pro-style offense, I think that's the thing to add to it as well. That's context that is needed. It's not, with all due respect to Clemson, that's a little bit more of a simplified offense, right, with what Trevor Lawrence is running. And again, that's fine. I mean, that's good coaching, right? And it's worked for them, and they had talent to pull it off. This is a little bit more of a complex offense, so it requires a lot more technical mastery of the system, schematic mastery, checks and audibles, things like that. And so we could argue all day about whether it should be that much. That's a different conversation, but it is. It is that. And I think Coach Reese showed a little bit last year that he knows how to simplify things for whatever reason. And he had to simplify things last year because of the fact that the offensive line wasn't very good. And so he's able to simplify things. So I think he showed he can simplify it to a degree, but you can only simplify a pro-style offense so much against Ohio State, Clemson, USC, Alabama, Georgia, right? Those type of teams. And that's kind of where we're getting to. So these are positions that experience is incredibly beneficial. And I think that's the contrast to when we talk about the sophomore classes. Running backs, receiver, tight end to a degree are positions where I think a younger player can make a smoother transition if he's got the physical talent. Mm-hmm. It's not the same case when it comes to offensive line and it comes to quarterback. So let's dive into – go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say, and to follow up on that, the reason that we're so excited about this class, on top of the fact that they're playing paramount positions, we got eyes on a lot of these players early on. As freshmen, we saw a lot of these guys. They're also extremely talented. I mean, let's not undersell that for a second, right? We're talking about Blake Fisher, Joe Alt, Tyler Buchner, this group so much because this is a really gifted group. There could be, if Blake Fisher takes the steps that we think that he can, there's no reason he can't be a first-round pick. Same thing with Joe Alt. Tyler Buchner, there's no reason he can't be the next great quarterback at Notre Dame. That talent is there for Notre Dame. Their talent has never been an issue, and it's certainly not an issue in the sophomore class, which gets me even more excited because it's just – there is so many dudes that we're going to talk about today, and all of them are just extremely gifted and have a chance to have a big role on this team today.
So obviously there's one position that's going to get the most discussion, but it's not the one we're going to start off today. Quarterback's going to be a big part of this conversation, and it's the topic that everybody talks about. And honestly, if we did a quarterback show every day and I wrote an article about Tyler Buckner every day, we'd get tons of clicks and downloads and views.
Sure.
But the group that I think is most important is the offensive line. And there's 3 players from the sophomore class that I think are going to be vital to success this year, and 2 especially that we expect to be starters. And that is obviously your bookend tackles are both true sophomores. Joe Alt, left tackle, and Blake Fisher, right tackle. I also am very curious to see what kind of emergence we see this season from Rocco Spindler. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't add him to the conversation because injuries happen, right? And you've got a veteran left guard who is coming off of an offseason torn pectoral muscle. You've got a 6-year senior at right guard who's a guy that's battled injuries for 3 years now. Your depth is going to be needed at some point in time, or at least you hope so. And does Rocco tap into his full potential and become that guy? That's another question mark to have. But we're going to focus mainly on the 2 tackles, Ryan. And the reality is if this team is going to be an elite team, the offense has to play like one of the 5 to 6 best offensive lines in the country. It's quite a tall task to ask that of a unit that was not in the top 30 offensive lines last year. And that's being kind, I think. I think that's being relatively kind.
Agree.
Now, we've got some changes. Harry Hiestand has arrived. That instills a great deal of confidence. We've seen him look, the reality is his 2015 and 2017 offensive lines were, in my opinion, the best offensive lines in college football in those seasons. And in both years, he relied on young players, right? You had Quentin Nelson starting at left guard as a redshirt freshman, which means he had way less experience than Joe Alt and Blake Fisher did when he started at left guard in 2015. When Quentin Nelson got hurt against USC, they replaced him with Alex Bars, a redshirt freshman who stepped into that spot. Mike McGlinchey was a redshirt sophomore that season, but he had 1 career start under his belt coming into that campaign. So you had a young group. And then you look at 2017 and your starting right tackle was a redshirt freshman who then would rotate every other series with a true freshman. Now, this is a unit that's going to rely on 2 true sophomores at tackles. And so those are very, very important roles for them to have. And the reality is this unit has to play, not have to play well, they have to play very well. You can't do that without the tackles, Ryan. And you're talking about young players that are going to be asked to go out in some big moments and play like veterans. And that is, the talent is obvious, but the question is going to be, can they get the consistency needed at that position? There's going to be games where Blake Fisher is going to look like a stud. There's going to be games and Joe Alt looks like a future 10-plus year veteran NFL left tackle. The question and what will ultimately determine the success of this unit is, can they get it to be consistently good, where the times they look great are balanced with just good football. What they have to avoid, Ryan, is when it looks great and then when they struggle because of their youth. The latter part is the thing that Notre Dame has to avoid if this offensive line is going to reach its potential, which is built around the tackles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes to the volatility, right, of having a younger player. I mean, consistency is something that people strive for, and that's usually where that experience level comes into effect. And it's very hard because I talked about this a little bit in the intro, but it's very hard to hide a tackle, right? Like you can hide a guard to a degree because you got other size guys around them. They're playing a little bit of decreased space, but offensive tackles, man, they're on an island a lot, right? And we're going to see them tested against some really good pass rushes this year and some good defenses, sporadically throughout the schedule. You're talking about the BYUs, and if Ohio State takes it to the next step, and Clemson's of the world, like there's going to be some really good defensive linemen that are going to test guys like Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. And it's funny, Brian, I feel like aside from Jared Patterson, those are the 2 guys that everyone's just kind of counting on, right? Like those are they're going to be good. Yeah, like we don't need to worry about them, right? Like they're going to be studs, and they very well could be, because I mean, why are we excited again? You don't often get guys that are, you don't often get a 6'7", 300+ pound former tight end turned left tackle that makes a freshman All-American who wasn't even the top offensive tackle in the class. Everyone was expecting Blake Fisher to be that freshman All-American. But then, of course, the injuries happen. We only get a game and a half of them. But I would say in that game, the first game, I thought, it was kind of, easing into it a little bit. But I thought he looked pretty good against Oklahoma State, especially in
Yeah.
pass pro. I thought he did a really good job in that game. You saw the spurts of how good he can be. And if these guys are what we think they are, and they are what we think they are close to their ceilings in 2022, because they're not going to hit their ceilings in 2022. I think that's very unfair to expect. But if they are studs in 2022 and consistent studs, then it's just going to make everything around it so much easier, right? Because you still have Jared Patterson, you still have Josh Lugg that has played good football. Jared Patterson should still be one of the best offensive linemen in college football. But if they are studs, you just need everybody else to be good. So anything other than plus in the every other spot is just an added bonus. So they are the key to unlocking this overall potential. And everyone asks, like, how long until they get to the Harry Hiestand level? As quick as those guys turn into studs, is as quick as they get to the Harry Hiestand level, in my opinion, because they have that type of talent.
The interesting thing, too, you talked about Blake Fisher last year. Blake played a game and a half of football. Somebody asked, is he technically a redshirt freshman? Yeah, he is. He's technically a redshirt freshman. The interesting thing is he didn't exactly have a easy task in his game and a half. That was the interesting thing about Blake's. His first half was a bunch of snaps against Jermaine Johnson, who was the top 25, 26. He was like 26 overall pick or something like that.
26 overall,
in the NFL draft this past year by the Jets. First round draft pick, transfer from Georgia. And I thought Blake held his own in that matchup. It was his first college football game. And then he comes back, and it's like, what's your welcome back to college football moment? You're playing the defense that has had the most sacks in college football last year. And oh, by the way, we're going to throw it 68 times. That's the other thing. And and I thought that him and Joe handled themselves well against an athletic and really well coached offensive line. And you could see what makes them special, Ryan, is there were times when Blake in that Oklahoma State game, you're like, man, that stance has got to get better. Boy, that kick slide's got to get better. Sure. And the technical aspects, like, yeah, that's going on teaching tape, but it's like here's what you can't do type of teaching tape. And it was true for Joe as well. But, Joe came in with a dad that played offensive line in the NFL, a little bit more advanced than Blake from a technical standpoint. But both of them had those issues. But it didn't really hurt them. And here's why. Because they're so big. And that's the thing is, like, there were times when Blake, I'm like, oh, he's about to get beat. I'm sitting there watching the game. I'm like, Blake's about to get beat. And then he would extend his arms like, no, he's good. He's good. Right. Because the getting beat part was more about his first step was not good. And when you're playing, and the reason I say get beat is I had watched a ton of Oklahoma State film. And when they beat you, when Brock Wright, or was it the Oliver kid? What's his first name? Colin
Oliver and Brock Martin.
Yeah. Right. And so once he would, Oliver was more of a speed guy. He was more of an athletic guy. When he would get you beat on the first step, you were done. And that's why he was so good. And then Brock Martin was a savvy, nuanced, pass rusher with all these different moves, and he'd get in your pads and all this. And there's times when Blake would kind of come off a little high, and you're like, man, or Joe would come off high, and all of a sudden they'd get their hands out, and it looked like, like the big brother teasing the little brother. You put his hand on his forehead and the little brother's like swinging, but he can't get to you. That's what it was like watching them play at times, where the technique wasn't there, but once they'd extend their hands, it's like they were able to get it because they're both pretty good athletes. And I think that's the part of Blake's game that people don't appreciate enough. Somebody, one of our customers says, hey, are you worried about Blake Fisher's athleticism due to the fact that he's a little bit knock-kneed? And I'm like, no. I understand the question because Blake didn't play a whole lot, and you have certain opinions of a guy that's 6'6", 330, right? But I'm like, no, I'm not. I think that's one of the aspects of his game that's very underrated, is he's a really good athlete for that size. And Joe is really technically sound, which can mask, again, his athleticism. This is a kid that played tight end his whole career. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the interesting thing, is this is a really athletic group. And with all due respect to Mike McGlinchey, I think both of them are better athletes laterally than what Mike McGlinchey was. I would say they're more comparable to Ronnie Stanley's. They're more comparable to guys like that as movers than what Mike McGlinchey, because Mike McGlinchey was a vertical force. He was a dynamo coming off the ball, but he could get a little bit lumbering laterally, because Mike's a really good athlete, but we're talking about a specific type of athleticism. It's the lateral speed.
Long legs, changing direction, redirecting.
He's a very tall, very tall player. It's not a natural thing, where I think Joe and Blake are also really tall, but they're built differently. Mike was long-legged. Mike was almost built more like a power forward than he was an offensive tackle, meaning he was a lot more leg than he is torso. And I think that's kind of where you kind of get a little bit of that. These guys, in my opinion, are very good movers. And I think that's an underrated aspect of this group is they're very long and they're movers, which means they don't necessarily have to have that grown man strength yet. And because that's the other big concern is the experience, but then the grown man strength, the been with Bayless 3, 4, 5 year strength that we're referring to, they can get away without having that because they're so long and they're so big. I saw a picture somebody sent me the other day of the offensive line posed together. Joe Walt looks like he's grown 2 inches. I'm not saying he has. I'm just looking at the picture. I'm like, maybe it's the camera angle, but he's like by far the tallest guy there. And
he's
he
only
just
19.
looks like he's
It's
really
possible,
filled out.
right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So it's going to be a really big line. And I think that's something where the combination of technical improvement, length, size, and athleticism because isn't that what you look for, Ryan? Like, okay, what does he not have? He doesn't have experience. Okay, what can we utilize or what will he be able to utilize to overcome something you cannot fix? You can't fix experience with a drill.
Right.
You can only fix experience with, here's novel concept, experience, which means he's got to play. So what are the traits they have to do that? And I think those are the traits you look at and say that they've got those things which can overcome the two concerns, experience and just the time in the weight room.
Yeah, I mean, I call it overcompensating traits. That's what I always kind of like to refer to, right? It's like if a guy, because this is like the arm length comparison. I know we don't have arm length concerns for either one of these players, but it's like if a guy has length concerns, they have to be a really good athlete because you have to kind of overcompensate that lack of ability to work in space, right? Like that's kind of where the overcompensating trait works. For a Blake Fisher and a Joe Walt, the fact that they are both 6'6 plus with long arms and both good athletes, that masks a lot of maybe technical deficiencies that they may have right now. And how do you get better at that, Brian? To your point, Harry Heastan drawing him a million times, but then also you need the live bullets, man. Like you need to go against Jermaine Johnson, right? You need to go against Miles Murphy. You need to go against these guys because that's how you take that technical refinement. You take it from a understanding but to a practical approach. You need to be able to work it. That's how you develop those good habits on film. So you're absolutely correct. And I mean, it's because I think a lot of people out there, Brian, are probably looking at Blake Fisher like, guys, he's 6'6", 330 and really powerful. He doesn't need to get stronger. But the key is that he is going to get stronger because he might not need to add a single more pound of weight, which is probably true.
Correct.
But he is going to get a whole lot stronger. If you think that he is physically dominant with displacement power now, wait until he has a couple years with Bayless. Because that's when he goes from a really good player to a dominant football player.
To an elite one. Right. Like Quentin Nelson is a perfect example. Quentin was huge. He was 330 plus as a redshirt freshman. He was strong naturally. I mean, look at some of the blocks he had that year. I mean, we could point out some of the one that people like to point out most from that year is the time he came off against Ohio State on a touchdown run, and he goes up, just destroys Raekwon McMillan and drives him, just destroys him. But he was stronger in 2017 than he was in 2015. Right. And so that's kind of what we're getting to. But it's also about the endurance aspect, the conditioning aspect of it. Right. As you get older, you get better in those areas. So those things you look for. But I predict, Ryan, I have a great deal of confidence. I would have been comfortable with this duo without a coaching change, honestly, because we saw it. We saw it in the game. Now, I would have had some issues in the run game because the technical problems that the whole line had. But I would have been confident in the pass game with this duo, even without a coaching change. Okay. Where I think we're going to see a jump from both of them. And this is where the strength is especially important. It's not as much. So it's pointing out about the bowl game. The lack of strength didn't hurt them in the bowl game because they're so long and big and athletic. It is more important in the run game. If they're going to go move against the better ends that they're going to face this year, the better D linemen they're going to face this year, that's where the strength is going to come into play. But more than anything, they need a big jump in technical improvement. And to me, that is where we need to see this team get better. This duo get better is the technical improvement. And that's where the Harry Heastan influence is going to have its biggest impact, Ryan, is learning how to play the game better because they are naturally long, which helps them from the standpoint of looking at it from a standpoint of pass pro, but in the run game, that length can be a detriment if you don't play with good technique. And
Yes.
that's where the Harry Hiestand impact more than anything is going to have the biggest impact for this duo.
And also, I like in the intro, Brian, that you talked about it's not just about being consistent against, the UNLVs of the world, right? It's about being against Ohio State, against Clemson. Why is that technical improvement so important? Because those guys can match you with the length and athleticism that you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
All due respect to Brock Martin and Colin Oliver, both really good college players. They're not the longest guys in the world, right? Colin Oliver's got some juice to him, but they're not long guys. So, like to your point, Joe Walt eventually could just kind of go, all right, it's over here, sir. Like I got a little more to me, a little length to me. But when they're going to get Miles Murphy, for instance, from Clemson, even Zach Harrison, even though he's not developed, those guys
he's still incredibly long.
Incredibly. Almost 36-inch arms on Zach Harrison. So those guys can start to outreach you or at least match your reach, right? That's where the technical side comes in. Because even as Zach Harrison, that is not as developed as he should be right now, if he gets to your outside shoulder and he gains extension on you, he can beat you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a player,
Jack Sawyer's that way, right?
Jack Sawyer, there's a lot of players. I mean, even Tyler Beatty that plays at BYU is one of those players. Like they're 6'5", 270 with length. Any of those guys, if they outreach you, they can beat you, right? And I think that that's where the technical refinement, when a guy does outreach you, hey, I need to reposition my hands. I need to get back inside positioning. I need to slide a certain direction and redirect in space. That's why it's important, because the better teams on the schedule are going to be able to negate some of your length and athleticism advantages. They're going to be able to. And that's why that technical refinement is very important for these two, because the talent is all there. But if they're also talented and technically sound, then you feel good about pretty much every matchup on the schedule.
So let's transition to, I would say, let's say 1A, 1B, right? When it comes to importance, and that's quarterback. And we spent a lot of time on Tyler Buchner. We won't spend a ton of time on him again now. But the reality is people ask, is there a quarterback battle at Notre Dame? Yes, there is a quarterback battle. Tyler Buchner still has a lot to prove. We discussed that the other day with when we had a really good question about that. But at the same time, Ryan, we will also admit, as much as I love Drew Pine as a kid and a leader and all those type of things, this team's ceiling is going to be determined by how good Tyler Buchner is this season. Yep. And when Tyler Buchner's on, this team is going to be very hard to stop. And I don't care who they're playing. When Tyler Buchner's off, this offense is going to be easier to stop. And the Virginia Tech game is a perfect example, because in the first half he was on and Virginia Tech had zero answers. Zero. I mean, they couldn't stop him. Second half, they were able to do some things that caused him to get out of his game. He wasn't making the quick decisions. He wasn't as accurate, and all. He was kind of starting to scramble more, and it slowed him down. And that, to me, is that game is going to epitomize his sophomore season. The question again is going to be, which version do we see most often? Right. That's going to be the question. Do we see the good version of Tyler Buchner, which to me makes this offense elite, potentially elite? Or do we see an inconsistent sophomore who's really being a full-time quarterback for the first time since 2019? Right. I mean, it's lost his senior year, we've talked about, in 2020 because of COVID. Last year he was practiced and used as more of a rotational niche player. Now he's the guy. What kind of jump does he make? Because he's another sophomore in this class whose success really ties into the overall success of the team. Because again, sophomores equal success on offense equals success as a team. And Tyler Buchner is going to be a big part of that.
And I think that Tyler Buchner could be a really successful college player if he didn't have the athletic upside that he has as a player. Like if he was strictly just a passer to his degree. So I think people really undersell the fact that, like, man, go look at like where he was in high school coming out. The kid could throw the football, and he could throw the football just about as good as anyone in the country. And that's, I think, something that's being undersold a little bit. There was a lot of huge flashes in the passing game that I'm really excited about. But Brian, this is where like the challenge of working against a dual threat quarterback, and I know you've talked about this so much, is even when he's not maybe pinpoint on a day and he's dealing, the fact that he also has that other element of being able to use his legs, be able to take an extra defender out of the box, even when he's not keeping the football. Those things now, I mean, every single play you have to deal with Tyler Buchner, even if he's straight-handed it off on a zone play. you're
Right.
still like, oh, I gotta be there just in case there's a pull, right? Like this is where when it's going well, it's unstoppable. Like it
Right.
really is. If he's throwing the football well, because the running element's always going to be there. Tyler Buckner's always going to be that type of athlete. But if he takes the step that we think he can as a passer this year, is
Yeah.
consistent in that regard, then it's, I mean, you have to count for it in every single play. And that is where, that's where defense coordinators start to have headaches, is when you have to account for a player on every single snap.
Well, we've talked about 2017 being the comparison for this. And I've talked about how USC came into that 2017 game against Notre Dame saying we're going to do everything we can to stop them from running the ball. And Chip Long did a couple things that were really good in that game. Number one is he got Kevin Stefferson going on jets early, right? If you remember that. I think it was like they ran like a reverse early. He didn't, I always confuse his jets and reverses with the ones from Braden Lindsey 2 years later. His didn't go for big plays, but they were enough to kind of slow them down. Then you had Brandon pulling the ball. He had a couple early runs, but the big thing was on the first drive, Notre Dame punts. USC gets the ball. Tavon Coney rips it out of Sam Darnold's hand. Notre Dame gets the ball back. And I believe that drive ended with Brandon banging a post route over the top to Equinemi St. Brown for a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Next drive, Notre Dame gets the ball, and Brandon throws another vertical pass for a touchdown. It was a back shoulder to Kevin Stefferson. Once Brandon showed the ability to hit the ball, hit throws down the field, USC had zero answers. Zero. Brandon went 9 of 19 for 120 yards that game. But because he's the dual threat guy, they were already worried about him running. Now they had to protect over the top of their head for deep balls. It made him undefensible. Then you look at another game later on down the line. You look at the NC State game. He goes 10 of 19 for 104 yards. Not overly effective, right? But he had a backside seam throw early in that game over the top to Durham Smythe that really started to take some of the pressure off, because NC State was like, okay, we've got to protect it. And then all of a sudden, you open up running lanes. And then the final example is, the game that I viewed to be the best game of Brandon's career was the Wake Forest game. He played 3 quarters of football. He racked up 280 passing yards in that game. He racked up 110 rushing yards that game. He only played 3 quarters of football. Brandon went 15 of 30 in that game. Completed 50% of his passes. Now, he should have been 16 of 30 because Chase had a bomb hit him right in the face, right, that he dropped.
Yep.
But okay, 16 of 30 doesn't exactly change the narrative. And the point is that Brandon didn't have to look like Brady Quinn or Jimmy Clausen or Jack Cohn for that offense to be unguardable, undefensible for a good month and a half of the season. He just had to be solid. Now, I would say that Tyler Buckner is a more dynamic passer than Brandon is, because he's always shown a better feel and better accuracy, and he hasn't necessarily had his mind warped into a negative thing the way that Brandon was his first 2 years working with Mike Sanford. So again, what is the expectation of this team have to be? And do you need Tyler Buckner to be a 4,000 yard passer? I don't think you do. He just needs to be a good passer to where you have to defend it. You have to respect it. And if you don't respect it, he's going to beat you with it. And that, as you said, that's the difficulty with a dual threat quarterback, because when Brandon wasn't on his game throwing, he could still do things as a runner to hurt you. Whereas if Jack Cohn wasn't on his game as a passer, and I would make the same case about Ian Book. If Ian Book wasn't on his game as a passer, Ian Book was not a designed runner. He was a guy that could scramble, right?
Yep.
That's not as dynamic to me if you're just a scrambler. It's what makes guys like Tyler so effective. And as we've seen over the years, it's guys that can not only make plays with their legs in the pass game, but also guys that can make plays in the run game. And that's a big difference between like Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen in the NFL. They're both very athletic players, but Pat Mahomes' athleticism is held strictly to the pass game, where Josh Allen's impact in the run game is not just with scrambles, but it's all not run game, but his legs. He uses his legs not just in the pass game, but he can also use it in the run game. And so it's a great advantage to have a guy like that, especially in college, in my opinion. And so, but again, we go back to, is Tyler going to be that guy consistently, or is it just going to be a guy that flashes? And I think that's going to be the difference between a 10-2 team and a team that's sitting down in the last the Sunday after the conference championships and saying, okay, what seed are we going to be in the playoff today? I think that's the difference is his play. And that's, again, why these two are tied, because the better the line is, the better the run game is, the better you take some of that burden off of Tyler Buchner. Then if he responds by being an impact player in what you ask him to do, this offense becomes very, very hard to defend.
Quarterback's the most important position in sports. I mean, we don't really have to harp on that too much to know that this team is going to be as good as Tyler Buchner can lead them to, right? Like, that is the end all be all to it. I'll say this, Brian, because I know obviously you have the deep coaching background. I know we kind of take this from a coaching angle sometime. As a former defensive coach, having a guy like a Tyler Buchner, if he was going against me, he would be the biggest headache in the world, because at the end of the day, football is a numbers game, right? So I'm thinking right now, we're going to sneak somebody down in the box. We're going to play a little play a little single high, get that extra safety down, because the RPO game is going to be predicated on like, hey, let's get that extra defender out of the box. So I'm going to bring an extra guy down into the box. But then as soon as Tyler, like, they hit two verts on one side and you're saying playing single high, then like, oh man, now I got to bring too high, because I know that they now have the threat to push the ball down the field. Football is such a chess match, but it's also defensively, it's much more of a reactive type of thing, whereas offense can kind of dictate a little bit more than a defense can dictate sometimes. So when you have a player like a Tyler Buchner who can hurt you in so many different ways, if he's on his game, it's almost impossible to stop every facet of an offense. Well, it is impossible to stop every facet of an offense. So I could not agree with you more, though. It's the fact that when you take everything into account, the fact that Tyler Buchner is a dynamic player, a dynamic athlete potentially. Well, dynamic athlete, dynamic player potentially, and he's also the quarterback of your team, that's where you're looking at him and saying he's going to be the key to unlocking how good this team overall can be, not even just on the offensive side of football.
So what's the best friend to a quarterback? Great offensive line. We talked about that. What's the second best friend to a quarterback? Pass catchers.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I would argue that of all the positions we've talked so far, sophomore success is more important to this position than the others. And here's what I would say. Yes, the offensive line cannot reach its full potential if the sophomore class doesn't step up, right? But you do have some veteran guys. You have Tosh Baker. You have Josh Lugg can move out the tackle. You have Michael Carmody's played tackle, although I wouldn't necessarily say that's an idea. I've always felt Jarrett Patterson could be a tackle. You've got some guys there that are veteran players who could step in if you needed it. Same thing at running back. If the sophomores don't play, okay, maybe the freshman does. Chris Tyree. It would hurt, right? And we'll get to that next. It would hurt a lot. Quarterback, you've got Drew Pine. At receiver, there's no chance, just from a number standpoint, there's almost no chance. And you can make a case it's true at running back as well, but there's almost no chance for this group to be successful if the sophomore class doesn't step up and play, because they make up such a big chunk of the rotation right now. I mean, they're 50% of the healthy rotation, if you even include Avery Davis as being healthy. Yeah. And so it's a very important part to just having a receiver depth chart. But beyond that, just throwing out numbers, Ryan, can this group come out and can it produce impact plays? And I think that's the big question mark when you look at this receiving core. And I think the conversation has to start with a guy that I think a lot of us are expecting to come out and be a breakout player, and that is Lorenzo Styles.
Yeah, I mean, he's the player that I envision that if he is as good as we think he is and he hits near his ceiling, that he's the guy that can line up at all three different positions and he can affect the game in so many different ways. That gives you the flexibility to, if I want to put Braden Lindsay in a different spot, if I want to put Lorenzo Styles as the W into the boundary and let him work out of there, he's the guy that I think unlocks every part of your passing offense, because he can provide so many different combinations of wide receivers coming in. Michael Mayer, working into the more of a wide receiver role with a Lorenzo Styles. Like, there's so many things that you can do with a Lorenzo Styles. I mean, he could be that RPO guy. He could work outside. He can be a route runner. The thing I love about Lorenzo, because I know we always get a question of who has more upside, Deion Colzie, Lorenzo Styles, like that's, that kind of that sophomore conversation. And I'm okay with people saying Deion Colzie, but I always come back to the fact that Lorenzo Styles can win in every single way. You want him to take the top off? He can do it. You want him to win after the catch? He can do it. You want him to win as a route runner? He can do it. So if he is as good as I think he can be, and he takes the step, Brian, and he becomes the best receiver, then I think he could be one of the best receivers in college football. Like, I think that he has that type of upside. I really do, because he's a player
This year?
that,
Are you talking about like this year? Or are you talking about like
yes,
this?
I
Okay.
think this year. I think this year. I do. I think that he has everything that you need.
Let me ask you this,
Yes.
Ryan, because I want to set you up to the answer you're about to make, because the thing I want to remind people is Ryan's, the difference between I think our channel and other channels that cover teams, not Notre Dame teams, but other teams, is they kind of only know their team.
Sure.
And we try to not be that way. And Ryan, especially because he does run an NFL draft site, has watched a lot of the receivers. And we've had conversations about Mario Williams and Jordan Addison and Xavier Worthy and guys like that. So you've seen a lot of these guys. So let me lead you into that what you're about to say with more of a directive question. What is it about Lorenzo's game compared to some of those other guys that makes you think that he can go from, being that kind of player? Because, I mean, we've seen jumps like that, right? I mean, Lorenzo Styles caught 24 passes last year. That's 4 times more than what Will Fuller had and Golden Tate had when they were true freshmen. They only caught 6. Well, both of them broke out the next year and had 1,000-yard seasons, right? Equanimous St. Brown went from 1 catch as a freshman in 2015 to over 50 catches, and I think it was like 961 yards as a sophomore, but he didn't play in a bowl game because they were terrible that year. So it's not exactly unheard of to see guys make jumps like that. So that part we can kind of negate. But I want to know from you specifically what you see from Lorenzo that makes you think he has the tools to become that type of player in regards to how he would compare to a Jordan Addison, right? A Xavier Worthy, some of the guys that we look at and view as, because Xavier Worthy's a sophomore as well, but he kind of broke out last year out of need, because there was no Kevin Austin and Michael Mayer to take touches. He had to be the guy for Texas last year. What is it that you see that makes you think he can be that player?
It is the all-around skill set that he has as a receiver. Like, I look at some guys, and you mentioned like Mario Williams, who is a similar player to like a Marvin Mims, that was his former teammate at Oklahoma. Great vertical deep threat type of players, but are they going to threaten every single part of the game? I think Lorenzo Styles can threaten every part. I really do believe that if it's a smaller corner, Lorenzo Styles can work the back shoulder and play some big football. I think that if it's a longer corner that doesn't change direction as well, then hey, he can change direction. He can get in and out of his breaks. He can beat you as a route runner. If you're running the RPO game, he can win after the catch and do all that type of stuff too. For me, what I think he can be is I think he can be an all-around wide receiver, where he might not be the most dynamic deep threat in college football, but he can be good everywhere across. And for me, I always value the guys that can do more as receivers, guys that can affect the game at multi-levels, the guys that can create more separation in different ways. I don't think there's any reason that if Lorenzo Styles hits his upside, that he's a 1,000-yard receiver and he's viewed as one of the best receivers in college football. Am I predicting it? Yes, I am, actually. I was going to
own it. I love it. Own it.
I was going to give myself a second to backtrack there, but no, I'm calling it right now. Lorenzo Styles has been my breakout. I mean, as much as a breakout as you can for a guy that's expected to be that, I think he's going to be a really good football player. And I think if he hits his ceiling, he's a guy that just affects the game in so many different ways. So that's why I think that he can be in the conversation with the best receivers in college football this year.
Mario Williams is an interesting comparison. They were both freshmen last year. Mario Williams had better numbers total. He had 35 catches for 380 yards, 4 touchdowns. Lorenzo had 24 catches for 344 yards and 1 touchdown. The difference is Mario was part of the Oklahoma rotation from day one. I mean, so Lorenzo didn't really step into the rotation really until the USC game.
Yep.
And we could argue why that was, but he didn't really become a factor. The first 6 games of the year, he had 2 catches for 16 yards. He had a 2-yard catch against Toledo, and he had 1 catch coming off the bench when Joe Wilkins got hurt against Cincinnati. And then they did a ton of 12 personnel against Virginia Tech, but he jumps into the rotation. And in the last 7 games, he had three games with over 50 yards receiving. Mario Williams in the entire season, and he played in 12 games last year. So Lorenzo technically played in more games, but Lorenzo wasn't a part of the rotation. He just kind of would come in and do what they did with receiver backups for most of Brian Kelly's tenure when they were young, and just go out there and get snaps and block and don't actually get the football. But he had 1 game of over 50 yards the entire year. And his second highest game was 49 yards against Western Carolina. So, but you're seeing all these things, Mario Williams on the Biletnikoff watch list and all this stuff. Why? He had 35 catches for 380 yards in 12 games, right? Lorenzo Styles had basically, 22 catches for 328 yards, if I'm doing the math correctly, in 7 games, essentially, right? So it comes down to there's a perception, right? Like if Mario Williams would have transferred to Notre Dame this offseason, Notre Dame fans would be like, oh my gosh, we got Mario Williams.
I know.
But I would argue that Lorenzo Styles is the better football player. And we saw that on the field last year. And so so the reason I'm saying this is to follow up on Ryan said, because that's part of the reason that we're not as concerned about the receiving core this year as a lot of people are, other than the only concern we have is just bodies.
Yes.
It's can they stay healthy? And then the second concern we have is if something happens to Lorenzo, then you get concerned. That's why the next 2 kids in the sophomore class are important. And that is Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas. We're going to talk about Deion first because he's an intriguing player because he's already started to become a little bit of a whipping boy with Notre Dame fans for some reason. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's because of the way that's reported, things that I've said that maybe people are taking to mean something that I don't mean. People questioning his work ethic and does he love the game? And it's like, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is he was so much better than the high school competition he played against, that when you think it's like, okay, I think I'm giving it my all. I think I'm doing this. I think I've done what I need to do to be great because I'm so much better than who I play against. And it's not till you get to that next level. And then you realize, wow, he's pretty raw. Deion is also a year younger than most kids in his grade. And I think it's way too early for people to be writing him off. And I've heard some people say, well, he was really bad in the spring game. He missed a catch. He missed a catch that he should have caught early in the game. But the reality is he'd have caught 2 touchdown passes if Drew Pine just doesn't whiff on 2 throws. One, he doesn't throw to him, and he should have. Would have been an easy touchdown. The other, he's open in between 3 guys, and he throws it at his feet. So I saw some encouraging things from Deion, and I saw things that say Deion's got to get better, right?
Sure.
But he's a guy with a lot of talent. And because of his unique size, 6'5", 207, he's not fast, but he's a vertical threat, if that makes sense. He's really athletic. I mean, you watch him on the basketball court and some of the dunks he has on the basketball court, you're like, this kid's got some explosiveness to him, right? He's a kid that, to me, forget I did my rant on his perception. Let's now talk about him as a player.
Yep.
They don't need him to be the Will Fuller sophomore breakout, the Equanimous St. Brown sophomore breakout. Do you know what they need him to be? They need him to be the sophomore version of Chase Claypool. If you remember when Chase in 2017 as a sophomore, should have played earlier in the year, didn't. But when he finally got in the rotation, he had some moments. He was the starting slot. I'm not saying that he's going to be that because that position's not open for Notre Dame. But, Chase had some games. He had 4 catches for 56 yards against Michigan State. You remember that really amazing back shoulder catch he had in that game? He comes out and he has 9 catches for 180 yards against Wake Forest. He had some quality moments that year and had 29 catches for 402 yards and a couple touchdowns. Didn't play against Georgia. He should have. Didn't play in the bowl game. If you remember, he got hurt. So that was really in like 11 games. If you look at that kind of production, if Deion Colsey can just have that kind of season, 25 to 35 catches, 400 plus yards. Chase only averaged 13.9 yards per catch and, 2, 3, 4 touchdowns. If he can just do that, it adds so much to this offense, Ryan, because he's the one receiver that's got the combination of size and girth and length. His catch radius is enormous that he all of a sudden gives Tyler Buckner a weapon that he doesn't have. And that includes Tobias Merriweather because Tobias is a different kind of receiver than Deion. So he is a bit of a unicorn on this roster. And that only adds to why it's important that Deion really step up and become again, doesn't need to be a breakout. Just have that sort of Chase Claypool progressing as a sophomore type of be a key part of the rotation, give me 25, 35 catches If he can be that, he adds a ton of value to this offense, Ryan.
Well, he's a guy where you want to talk about a quarterback's best friends. I mean, if he's shown that he is a consistent pass catcher, that size and that frame, I mean, I'm in a tough spot, Tyler, right? Like, let's get the ball out there and let's make him make a contested catch for us. Like, that's what he is as a football player for me, and I think that's what he can be. Brian, he's the most volatile player, which is why I think that Notre Dame fans do have that perception, right? Like, because let's be honest, if Deion hits his ceiling or close to it this year, he could be that sophomore breakout.
Sure.
Like, he's that talented.
He's capable of it. Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Or he could be the fourth leading receiver, a part of your receiving crew, right? Like, there's a lot of volatility to how good he can be. But he, I think, right around near Lorenzo Styles, could be that guy where he could transform your outlook of this receiver core to the highest degree, because I mean, he can give you an element that you just don't really have. I mean, you're excited about Tobias Merriweather, but he's another guy that's going to be a true freshman, right? Like, you don't know exactly how ready he's going to be to play. We expect him to contribute. But, I mean, if Deion Colzie gives you that size, that springiness, that catch radius, that is a different element than you have on your offense right now, because Lorenzo Styles is kind of that 6'1", separator. Avery Davis is more that true slot type. You don't really have that guy. Brain Lindsey's kind of a guy that creates explosive plays, but he's kind of a smaller, compact frame. You don't have the 6'5" guy, right? And you've seen Notre Dame has traditionally had that guy in the boundary. They've usually had that type of player. So if Deion Colzie is able to unlock that, that could be the difference between being a good to really good pass receiving core and being being an elite one potentially. Right. I'm not sure that they have a chance to be a top 5-10 this year, but they can get darn
if
close
you only
if Deion
include
Colzie
receivers.
takes that step. Yes,
if you only correct.
Yes, not including Michael Mayer, because that's a completely different conversation. 100%. Right. But if Deion Colzie takes that step and is that guy that his talent says he can be, then they're in the conversation at that point, because he has all the talent in the world. It's just about beginning to tap into it. And we have obviously high expectations for him, but there is volatility with him, which makes it an interesting conversation, and one where he could be the surprise star of the year, or he could just be a guy that needs another year. Like, there's just so much volatility to it, but he has so much upside to the position.
And players develop differently. I mean, Miles Boykin put it to you like this. I'm pretty sure, I'm going to have to look at Miles' stats, but I'm pretty sure that Deion Colzie had about as much production as a true freshman than Miles had his first 2 years combined at Notre Dame. No, I'm wrong. Miles, as a freshman, played 0 snaps, and as a sophomore, redshirt freshman, had 6 catches for 81 yards, most of it in mop-up duty. So Deion is about a game away from passing Miles Boykin's production after 2 years. Right, guys develop at different ages. Chase Claypool is a true freshman, had like 5 catches for like 81 yards or something like that. Deion had 4 for 67. So it's like, sometimes it's like a guy is so talented that almost if he doesn't show it right away, that people get frustrated. Guys develop at different stages. Michael Floyd was so much better than Golden Tate when they were both freshmen. Michael as a freshman in 2008. Matter of fact, Michael Floyd was better as a freshman than Golden Tate was as a sophomore. Because if you go back and look at the 2008 season, up until the point that Michael Floyd got hurt, and the same thing was true in 2009, when Michael Floyd would go into a season healthy, he was always the number 1 receiver. Golden Tate was number 2. Golden didn't really start blowing up until Michael got hurt. If you go look at their production in the first 3 games before Michael got hurt, Michael was their most productive receiver. Same was true in 2008 when Michael was a freshman and Golden was a sophomore. And then Michael got hurt and was banged up, and Golden emerged and had the breakout season. That's not because Michael Floyd was necessarily better than Golden Tate. It's Michael Floyd was more advanced than Golden Tate. Sure. Golden Tate was a running back for a lot of his high school career. And that's kind of my point about Deion is if he doesn't emerge this year as the guy, it doesn't mean he's a bust or an underachiever or anything like that. It's everybody develops differently. But I do think he has to show something this year. I don't think I'm going to be confident predicting him to break out as a junior if he doesn't make a similar Chase Claypool sophomore type of leap. What is your thoughts on that aspect of it, Ryan?
You have to see progress. You absolutely do. And I know we've talked a lot about Tobias Merriweather getting in here, right? And like, hey, you're not the only tall guy anymore in the room, right? Like, let's go a little bit, right? A guy that's a little younger than you, that's going to be able to challenge you and is as talented as you are. So I agree. I think that there needs to be some progress. Like this can't be a lost season for Deion Colsey. He has to show that he has taken a step forward because we think he has better coaching this year, right? He has a guy like a Tobias Merriweather coming up behind him. He has to be a guy that is able to take those challenges and to tangibly turn that into upside on the field. So I agree with you, Brian. And the other thing about him is I called him a safety blanket earlier. Why is that? Because a guy that big, that long, is always open. He's always open, man. You put it on the back shoulder, he's always open, right? And that brings such a different element to your passing attack. But I agree with you 100%. This can't just be the same as we saw from Deion last year, where like you saw it a couple times, but you couldn't depend on it, right? Because he was just kind of getting eased into the game. You need to see substantial growth, exponential growth is what I like to see this year. From game 1 to game 12 or 13, whatever it ends up being, I want to see exponential growth. By the end of the season, I want to see a guy where now, if he wasn't a breakout sophomore player, he ended the year where it was kind of like Lorenzo Styles type of thing, right? Lorenzo didn't play a ton, got eased into it, started making plays, and by the end of the year, he became that player where now you're like, oh, 2022, that's the breakout guy.
Right.
I want Deion Colsey to be that guy this time next spring, where you're like, he showed a lot last year, but now he's a dude this next year.
Let's talk about the other sophomore receiver in this class. And to me, he's the biggest enigma of the group, and that's Jaden Thomas. The reason I say that is we have just seen so little of Jaden the last 2 years. He didn't earn a single snap last year. And I thought he was going to play in the bowl game because I kept hearing from people, oh, Jaden Thomas is the best receiver they have right now in practice and all this. And then they don't play him, which I didn't understand. But that's why I just sometimes tend to take what I hear from practice with a grain of salt, in regard to bowl practice, I should say.
Yeah.
And then he comes out in the spring and we're hearing all this stuff about how good he looks in the winter. And then we get to the practices that are open and just didn't see a whole lot, right? Just didn't show a whole lot, had a couple drops, just didn't look really dynamic. Then we get to the spring game and he looks like a completely different guy. And the reason he's hard to evaluate is because I liked Jaden when Notre Dame landed him and because off of his junior film, he was a really good player. He could do things after the catch. He was a guy that showed some ability to stretch the field. He was a center fielder in baseball. He's a guy who could really move. He wasn't a burner, but he's really athletic. Yeah. Then his senior year, he plays almost the whole year with turf toe, which if you've never had turf toe, it's really painful. And it's really hard you can't be explosive with turf toe. It's just whether or not you can play with the pain or not. And that's why it's really hard for skill players. It's like Chris Tyree. I mean, you just plant on the foot. It's like hitting the gas in your car and just nothing happens, right? It's just not gonna happen. Your car goes from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Well, then you get turf toe and it goes from 0 to 60 in like 9 seconds, right? It's just like to create an analogy of you just have no juice, and that's what Jaden was playing with his whole senior year. Now, number one, kudos to playing as much as he did with that injury. And then number two, but it makes it hard to okay, well, what is Jaden? We didn't see him. He actually regressed as a senior simply because of the injury, right? Not that he regressed like he wasn't as good or, wasn't as talented. He got stiff in the hips. He, wasn't trying hard. It's just, he regressed from a productiveness standpoint because of an injury that was outside of his control. And then we come out, we don't see him as a freshman. So like, he's sort of that, and that's kind of the thing I think with Deion is there's all this excitement about Jaden Thomas and people saying, well, he's going to be this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, based on what? What have you seen from Jaden Thomas to make you say that, right? Well, you've seen Deion, and now he's kind of the guy you can pick apart. So take away that aspect of it, which I think is a little silly because then it comes across like I'm tearing down Jaden. It's not it at all.
Sure.
But here's what I will say. If Jaden Thomas can go into the season and be the guy that he was in the spring game, that's going to answer ease so many concerns about this receiving core. Because the thing I like about him, Ryan, he's a very unique player on this roster. Yep. He's probably got the second best size of all the returners, right? 6'1.5", 215 pounds. He's a thick kid. He's got some height to him. Good catch radius, not elite, but it's good. It's better than some of the smaller guys. But he's surprisingly nimble for his size. And we saw that in the spring game, which part of it was a good play by him, and the other part of it was a terrible play by Ramon Henderson. But that juke that he had of Ramon to kind of shake him up, and that's stuff we've heard about him doing in practice that we've never seen him do in practice. So he showed something to where it's like, okay, with his unique body type, The reality is, Ryan, I think he can play all three positions in this offense.
Yep.
Getting a guy like that brings some size, some after the catch, and there's nothing he's great at, in my opinion. But he's just kind of got a really nice all-around game. He's got a natural feel for football that when you put all that together and his versatility, he's like a utility infielder, and I mean that in the most complimentary fashion possible. Not like he's a guy that you're bringing to pinch hit in the ninth inning or, bringing as a defensive sub. What I mean is that it's like more of like a Pete Rose type, where Pete Rose, like, where was Pete Rose? Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame? I believe he should be. The question then would be, okay, but where? Third base, first base, left field, like he played all over. He could, and that's kind of Jaden Thomas. If you need him in the boundary, he can play in the boundary. If you need him in the slot, he can play the slot. If you need him into the field, he can play the field. That's so important to be able to have a guy that can be a backup all those different positions. And I think that's more than anything what I'm hoping we see from Jaden. And then beyond that, if he can just be an effective rotation player at all those positions, anything beyond that would be just a bonus, in my opinion.
I'm sorry. I'm stuck a little bit on, and this is awesome. I thank you for this so much, but now I have Jaden Thomas as the Pete Rose of Notre Dame wide receivers, and I love it, man.
Hey, you know what? I'm a Reds fan, and hey, aren't you a Phillies fan?
I am a Phillies fan.
Okay, well, he won a World Series with the Phillies.
I got nothing against Charlie Hustle, man. He's a great player, right? Got nothing against him. But to your point, though, Brian, one way that you can eliminate some depth issues is to have guys that can do multiple things, right? To have a guy that can play all over the place, right? That kind of alleviates a little bit of that stress because now you don't have to have a 3 deep with guys that just are W's, just are slots, just are to the field. Like you can have a guy now that if you're down a player in the slot, let's say, Jaden, go play the slot. If someone's, a little nicked up in the W, Jaden, I need you to go out there and give me some reps at W, right? Like that's what I think Jaden Thomas can provide you. I think that he is, I don't want to call him depth because I think he can play, right? Like I saw him in the spring game and I'm like,
depth is important to us. Depth is not an insult at a position like this. People need to understand that. Yes.
I don't want people to hear it as I'm saying that he's just a depth piece and he's not going to contribute at all, right? Like he's insurance. He's not insurance. I think he can play football. And like to your point, he's a guy that can do a little bit after the catch. He has some sleekness to him as a route runner. He kind of takes you a little bit by surprise. I think that he honestly, again, it was a bad tackle attempt by Ramon on the reverse or whatever it was, right? The end around. But he has a little bit of this like weird kind of style that Jaden brings to the game where he kind of takes you off guard a little bit. He's got a little craftiness to him, I guess, if you want to phrase it like that. So I think that he can help with the depth because I think that he can play multiple spots to your degree. And I think he can contribute. I think one thing that I've seen from him is he is one of the more sure-handed pass catchers that I saw at least live, where I didn't see any issues with fighting the football or, double catches or anything like that. He was a pretty consistent pass catcher. So if he can give you consistency and he can give you alignment versatility, then that's a huge bonus for this team that does not have great depth. They just don't.
And we're not saying he may start. He may win a starting job. That's not what we're referring to. I honestly feel like he's better not starting. Because if you start him, it somewhat narrows him into a spot a little bit where I kind of want to see. Sometimes, you want a guy to be a master of something, right? Sometimes, however, the need of your team is I don't really care as much in 2022 about Jaden becoming a master of the X, Z, or Y, or W. I care more about him being a jack of all trades. You know what I mean? And normally that's not the case. But in this instance, because of the lack of depth, because we don't know about Joe Wilkins' health. We don't know about Avery Davis's health. Like if Avery gets hurt again or can't play early, you're almost then forcing Lorenzo Styles to be almost a full-time slot. That's not to me a situation that I'm super comfortable with. Okay. But if you have a guy like Jaden Thomas who can then also step in and give you some slot reps, then you can maybe use Lorenzo in other positions. So that's kind of where I look at it, where he brings such great value to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that can contribute, but also give you insurance at multiple spots, right? Like that's very rare. I mean, like usually a guy is a contributor and he's just a contributor at one spot, or he's a guy that's just going to fill in the back and be a backup W or backup whatever. But Jaden Thomas, I think he could do a little bit of both for you. So I actually think the floor on Jaden's pretty high, right? Like, I don't know if the ceiling's as high as like a Deion Colsey is, for instance. I mean, I know it's not, in my opinion anyway, but the floor is something that's really interesting and something that you need. And I think that Jaden can provide that to you. He can give you the consistency and the feeling of comforts, knowing that he's on the roster and he can do a variety of things for you as well.
So we just talked about three guys with three very distinct skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
And it just reminds people why I feel it's so important to recruit diversity at wide receiver.
Yep.
You need guys who can do different things because your team is going to have different roles. And and it's not once did we say, okay, well, this guy's size is a hindrance or whatever. It's nice to have some tall guys. They don't all have to be tall. You don't need a slot that's 5'10" and shifty. You need somebody that's shifty. I don't care if he's 6'1", 215 and shifty or 5'10", 165 and shifty. You need different skill sets. And that's what I love about the sophomore class, Ryan, because all three of these kids are very different from each other. And that makes it, like you said, when you have numbers issues, having guys that bring different skills to the table is so important, especially if one of them can be a guy that can play multiple spots. And I would argue that two of them. I think Jaden can play all three of them with the most naturalness when you include the boundary. Yeah. I think Jaden can play the boundary and the field really clean. He can play the slot in certain areas, but I wouldn't call him like necessarily where I'd say that's his best spot.
Sure.
But Lorenzo, I think, is similar. I think Lorenzo's two best spots are the two field positions, slot and outside. I think he's a more natural outside guy. May have to play some more slot this year with Braden Lindsay also there. I think Lorenzo can also play some boundary. It's just not of the three I would put him at, it probably be third. But if you need to get your best three on the field and it's Avery Davis and Braden Lindsay and Lorenzo Styles, I'm totally fine putting Lorenzo in the boundary. And I think and it doesn't change my prediction for him. Okay. But it's about finding them in their best spot. But when you have a guy like Jaden Thomas that can do so much, it makes it much easier to take your dude in Lorenzo and say, we're going to put Lorenzo where he's best, because then we can put Jaden in that other spot. And I think It adds to the value. But this trio, to me, you've got a really tall, big guy. You've got sort of that middle of the road size, 6'1.5", 215. Then you've got the speedy guy who also has some length to him. It just makes for a really unique group. And the fact is they're going to need this group to produce. And you said Lorenzo may be 1,000-yard guy. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. You definitely need over 1,000 yards from this group, from this class. You need at least, I would argue maybe 1,200. Yeah. I would say close to that is kind of what you need from a production standpoint from the sophomore class. And hopefully it's not all in one guy. You know what I mean? Now, if Lorenzo breaks out with 1,000, then you're saying, well, I hope it's at least 1,500 as a, kind of thing. Yep. But that's kind of where I come from. I really feel like this is a situation where this group is going to be so important to it. Let's transition to another position where it's very, very important, let's say. That's running back. And I think you can make a case. Like I was making the case because this is what I thought through early in the show, that I think receiver is most important just from a number standpoint. But as I'm making that argument, I'm then in my own head having a counter argument with myself, which may be a problem I may need to talk to somebody about, where I'm like, you know what? No, I think running back, it may be the case, right? Because of the fact of Jadarian Price being hurt. Because now the sophomore class is literally half of your healthy depth chart. And when you will be. I still don't know when Logan Diggs is going to come back. I've heard some people say it could be September. Heard some people say fall camp. Some people say September. I've heard people say October, November. I don't know. Notre Dame hasn't told us. He's going to have to come back at some point in time. And to me, when he does come back, you've got Audric Estime, who his role has just gone way up from an important standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. And Logan Diggs, when he comes back, is going to be very important to what this football team is trying to be. The sophomore class at running back, I mean, the running game in general is so vitally important. And you're going to have three really important pieces from a ball carrying standpoint in the sophomore class. When you talk about Tyler Buckner, at quarterback, but then you talk about Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. This team cannot be the running team it wants to be without the sophomore class. Bookend tackles, quarterback, and your 2 running backs.
These running backs are really interesting, Brian, because especially Estime, he brings a style that is just not on the roster otherwise, right? Like you have Chris Tyree, who's that dynamic one-cut speed back. You're going to have guys like Jabron Payne that are coming in as true freshmen that are sort of similar to Chris Tyree-ish, not quite as fast.
Mm-hmm.
Logan Diggs is more of your slippery type of runner, like a zone-type base player. But then you have Audric Estime, who is kind of that battering ram that has good feet, right? Like you just don't have that 220 plus pounds running back in the arsenal other than an Audric Estime. So he brings something. And I know we talk about things fitting well, right? Positionally. If he is able to be a player for this team this year and be a contributor, a high contributor, because we know he's going to contribute in some fashion, but if he's able to be a guy on this team, he brings something that you just don't have otherwise. And if he is able to take those reins, because it stinks that Logan Diggs may not start the season healthy. I hate injuries, and I hate especially players that work so hard to get an opportunity, and then something unfortunate happens like that. But Estime Household does, because of it, have an opportunity, a bigger role.
And here's the thing too, Ryan. He may have seized that anyway.
Sure.
And that's the thing that about Audric is I feel like a lot of people are thinking, well, he's now thrust into this role. Like,
by default.
What did he tweet after the bowl game last year? I'm winning the Doak Walker Award next year. I mean, first of all, it's like you always take like, hey, you don't want to put that bullseye on your chest. Well, Audric said, here it is. I'm gonna paint it on for you. You know what I mean? That's gonna be mine. And he's gone out and worked for it. Sure. He's a very unique player. I would say if you can get him and Tyree both going, that is where you can have a really, really dynamic 1-2 punch. And then if you throw in Logan Diggs at some point in time, because the other thing I love is Audric we've talked about him recently, so we won't dive too much into specifics about his game again. We'll talk about the impact he's going to have. He's like you said, he brings a different style because he can hammer you. But as we've also talked about, he's a guy that can also do a little bit of, you think you're bracing yourself to get run over, and then he hits you with the dead leg and bounces outside or spins off of you and that kind of thing. And those are aspects where you look at and say, boy, this kid can do something. Or, you're waiting for him to juke you and he says, this guy's on his heels. I'm putting my shoulder down and I'm running this guy over.
Right.
And he brings that. And then all of a sudden, you go 20-21 personnel and you put Chris Tyree in the slot and you run a jet motion and you're like, okay, are they handing the ball off to Chris Tyree? Are they about to have this 230-pound monster coming right at me? Oh, the quarterback pulled. Like you got Tyree to your slot to your left. You got Audric Estime to your left in the backfield. You run Chris Tyree on a jet motion, and then you're faking the read zone. So pre-snap, you've had to deal with Tyree, Estime, Buckner, all going in 3 different directions. That's a normal part of the offense. Right. And he's such a unique player that it's kind of like, boy, you better bring your lunch pail to handle a kid like that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to do. But he's going to have to stay healthy. And here's the big thing too about Audric. Here's where the injury to Diggs, to me, puts the most pressure on him. It's not carrying the football. It's not catching the football. He's going to have to step up and be a really effective pass pro guy. Now, the first thought was, well, he's 6'1", 230 pounds. It's not about size and strength. It's about, do you know who to block? And do you have the technical need to do it? Now, look, the biggest part of being a good pass pro guy is willingness. Do you want to be? It's want to. So, yes, I think he's going to want to. Then after that, it's, okay, you're a taller back. Are you able to sink your hips? Are you able to do this? Are you able to kind of step up and know that, hey, it's not just blocking this guy. I got to meet him in the hole to make sure that my quarterback's I'm not engaging that guy. Because what would happen last year, even sometimes with Kyron Williams, is he would step up and stand right in front of the quarterback and block a guy. Mm-hmm. And it looks like an effective block, but it really wasn't, because now the quarterback's got this engagement happening right in front of his face. Right. And so it's all of those things that go into it. And I mean, every running back does that at times. Kyron didn't do it often as he got older. Chris Tyree will do it. Other backs will do it. It's about all of it, the technical part, knowing that I'm reading inside out on this blitz. I may get this guy, I may get that guy. What happens if they both come? Okay, I got to take the near. I mean, there's all types of different things that you have to understand. He's going to have to do that now.
Sure.
And honestly, that's where I was most curious to see his role, because I had made the case in the spring that if he emerges as a pass pro guy, he could end up being the third down back. Just because you put him in there and because you don't want to have your tight end in max pro, you right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to have him out. Well, you put this 230-pound monster in the backfield that's physical. If he can step up and be a great pass pro guy, gives you a lot you can do with your third down. And here's the other thought: he checks out and swings out because nobody comes, and all of a sudden you've just got him a swing pass in space on 3rd and 5 running downhill.
Yes.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Right, you know what I mean? Those are the things I look at and say there's a lot he can bring to the table to this offense if he can be an all-around back. And that's the biggest concern I have, Ryan. And that's where the youth aspect of it comes into play in a pro-style offense.
Mm-hmm. That's more the Tony Jones type of third down back than the smaller type of shifty third down back. Yeah, I mean, you're not right, and you're not wrong. And that other side of it is too, Brian. It's the trust factor, right? That's kind of comes. Two of the better pass pro running backs that I can remember for Notre Dame are Kyron Williams that you mentioned already. I remember Darius Walker handled the pass blocking game really well during the Brady Quinn era there. So it's not about size necessarily. It's about the technical aspects and then the 1-2, because there's a lot of bigger backs, and even in the NFL, that are not great pass blockers just because their technical prowess is not great. They just think that you can kind of bully guys. So I agree. And I think that Audric just brings something that's just completely different to the roster. I've already said this, right? So I'm just kind of reiterating a point, but he's also a guy that down the latter stages of a game, if you have a lead, he can kind of wear you down, man. And he can wear you down. And talk about goal. This is my biggest worry right now, Brian. Honestly, I'll be completely transparent about this. If Chris Tyree is head and shoulders your best running back, and he becomes, let's say he becomes the large volume getter, what are you going to do on goal line situations? Is Tyler Buckner going to be a quarterback power guy on obvious goal line situations? Because I don't know if Chris Tyree is that guy, right? So Audric Estime might be that guy, the guy that needs you need a tough 2.
It's kind of interesting, Ryan, because it depends on where the ball is.
Sure.
Because look, inside the 2, if you have a good offensive line, sometimes I think there's value to having a guy like Chris Tyree, because he can just kind of get low and just kind of get behind him, right? In a lot of instances, that's not going to be as effective, especially against better defenses, right?
Sure.
But what I'll say is, Dylan McCullough this is where hiring D. McCullough helps you, because, and I think Lance Taylor would have been able to do this as well. This isn't saying instead of Lance Taylor. It means once Lance left, hiring Dylan McCullough was a good hire, because Lance brought some NFL aspects to the table. And I think Coach McCullough does as well. And what I mean by that is, in the NFL, everything is so situational, right? And you've got you're this guy, you're the third down back, you're this, you're that, you're this other thing, right? And in college, we're seeing them kind of come around to it to a degree slowly, but it's been a thing in the NFL for 15 years. I mean, go back to, Kevin Falk made a 10+ year career just being a third down back. Darren Sproles has been that guy, right? And so there is I think the opportunity for that in college. And that's where I kind of felt like Audric was going to make an impact, no matter, before the Logan Diggs injury, and we'll get to Logan Diggs in a second. I kind of felt like, there's a chance he's their third back behind Tyree and Logan Diggs. And so you look at him and say, but man, I'm getting that 3rd and 1 out in the field. I'm getting him in the game, right? I mean, because I feel like if he's doing what he needs to do, it's like, how do you not get positive yards? Now, if the offensive line is just terrible, I mean, if a good player's coming on a free run, right, you don't block Zach Harrison off the backside edge and he's coming on a free run. I don't care how big your back is. He's going down behind the line of scrimmage, right? But as long as your offensive line does his job, he's going to get you at least 2 yards, right? So I definitely think that role is there, Ryan. And I would say if you get inside the 10, he's my back. I mean, that's just kind of how I feel about it. He's my back because, and that's it. We've seen that before, right? Like some guys are just, kind of the get you their backs, and then you put someone else in, and that guy gets you in the end zone. And I'm okay with that. And look, Chris Tyree's going to get enough touchdowns from, the 40 that, you can have estimate play that role. The other part of it too, Ryan, is not just the effectiveness, but those are the scenarios where your back is taking the biggest pounding, third and
Sure.
2. And those are the things where, like somebody asked, Mark Bosing asked, I'm afraid Tyreek can't carry that load. Maybe keep him under 12 carries a game. I disagree. I think Chris Tyreek can be a modern day every down back because you just don't see guys carrying the ball 20 plus times a game. Kenneth Walker did it, Breece Hall did it, but there's a lot of examples of lead backs that didn't do that because you had a rotation. I've made this point before. The first year that Georgia had their breakout under Kirby Smart, 2017, they had 2 great backs, and their biggest back, Nick Chubb, who's a
monster.
Yeah. He had 20 plus carries in one game in 15 games, right? I mean, it's just not something that you see necessarily as much as you used to, other than teams that are just run it all the time. Kenneth Walker's, Breece Hall's, you just don't see it as much. I think Chris Tyree can give me 15 carries a game and maybe 4 or 5 catches a game if you're smart with those. Now, I don't think I necessarily would have him carrying 20. To me, I'm caring more about the touches, and my thing with him is that's a 15 touch a game kid, in my opinion. Your Tyree needs to be a 15 touch a game guy, unless he stops himself from being a 15 touch guy. What does that mean? He goes 70. That's how he can take himself out of it, right? That's what I mean by that. But the thing is okay, so we'll get him his touches, but how can we eliminate some of the wear and tear on, okay, don't put him in the game in 3rd and 1 where it's you're going to be running in and people are jumping on your legs and twisting up. And look, I don't care. The bottom of piles are still dangerous places to be, okay, because cameras aren't there. Guys laying on top of them, all that kind of stuff. Okay, take him out of those things where Audric Estime's body is better suited for that, and his game is better suited for that. So those are areas where you can protect Chris Tyree without protecting him from a sort of a pitch count, if that makes sense. So that's where I think that when you talk about these roles, those are things that I think Coach McCullough has talked about wanting to do, having guys that have different roles. He said something to Sean when we interviewed him at the press conference where it was like, there's like 8 or 9 different roles for running back. I'm like, well, okay, I can get you to 5. You know what I mean? Like,
can you? I'm thinking right now. It's all right. Goal line, 3rd down.
Yeah, pass pro, slot receiver.
Sure. You're talking about like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, those are all. I think that's the only way I can get to 8. Right? Is if you're doing that. But the point being that he views as, hey, if this guy can only do this, then you know what? We're going to use him to do that. And I think that's good coaching. And I'm hoping that's what we see from the backs this year.
Look what he just did in Kansas City. I mean, when they won the Super Bowl with him, right? He was Damian Williams was the player in that game. You're for like
that was a patchwork group of running backs that he put together that year.
That's my point. Is that like one game to the next, it could be a different guy, right? And that's a big. I really think that the running back unit on that team in general, that Chiefs Super Bowl team, was a very underrated position because everyone want to talk about Patrick Mahomes, and for good reason. He's the best quarterback in the NFL. But I mean, the running game in that Super Bowl was huge. Damian Williams was a conversation to maybe being the MVP in that Super Bowl. He was a very important player. And I mean, there would be some weeks where you didn't even see Damian Williams because it's just like you're.
He only rushed for like 400 some yards that year. Like I think he had like 400 some yards the whole season. And he goes out and rushes for $1 in the Super Bowl, right? It's like, okay, I'm like having Timmy Smith flashbacks. You know what I mean?
Timmy Smith, good one.
But I'm a Broncos fan. That's a very, very traumatic experience in my life. I learned a very valuable life lesson that day. I think I was like 11, and I talked mad trash during that week of the Super Bowl. And then Denver jumps out to a 10-0 start. I'm a Broncos fan. My parents are Redskins fans. I am that ignorant little 11-year-old talking serious trash to my dad. And then 35-second quarter points later, I'm ripping my jersey off, throwing it down in anger.
Timmy Smith ran for like 200 that game. Some crazy number.
I've heard that guy before or since. But he went for like $2 in that game. It was a sad, sad day for me. So back to running back. Logan Diggs is a guy that's a very interesting player. I love his game. I feel like last year was the worst thing that ever happened to Logan Diggs. And here's what I mean by that. He's a big back. He's a 200-plus pound back, and he can run you over, but he's very nimble and athletic, and we saw that last year. He's a guy that's – what I mean by bad habit is he is a playmaker at running back. But two things happened last year that to me I think created some very bad habits for Logan. Number one, he watched Kyren Williams play. And Kyren was like all over the place. That was because of how bad the line was. I'm not ripping Kyron for that. It was born out of necessity. Okay. Then Logan sees that and deals with the similar thing. And as a younger player, Kyron was a junior. He had kind of gone through the rigors the year before. He understood the difference. I still felt, at times he would kind of bounce when he shouldn't have, but Kyron also understood as a veteran player, okay, it's 3rd and 1. I just need to put my foot in the ground and get one in an inch, right? To move the chains. Logan, I think, was always looking for the home run. He was a little bit like Josh Adams in that regard, but different style of athlete. Josh was not a very effective every down back because he was always looking for the home. He was a great home run hitter.
Sure.
As a junior, he wasn't as effective as an every down back as he was as a freshman because he developed some bad habits. And Logan developed some bad habits out of necessity. There was a play in the Sugar Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl. I'll eventually get to the major bowl that they played in the Fiesta Bowl, where he gets the ball and he stops. And he's like looking for a hole. And it's like, dude, you're 215 pounds. Just it's 3rd and 1. Just put your foot in the ground and hammer that thing forward. And I get why he didn't, because the offensive line stunk. But that's a concern I have for Logan. And we saw a little bit in the spring game is he's got to learn to know when to use your skills and because they're impressive. I mean, how highly ranked I had Logan Diggs coming out. I said, this kid is a dude, right? He's got to learn he's got to become more of a savvy back this year, Ryan, where look, it's not every play is going to be a home run. Not every play is going to get outside and leap over a guy. Sometimes it's get 2 yards.
Sure.
And I think if he can learn that whenever he comes back, if Tyree and Estime are still healthy and Diggs comes back as a more disciplined runner, this is going to be a filthy backfield because Logan Diggs can flat out play. Yeah. And I think he is almost like a combination of Audric and Kyron. Right.
I was about to say, even on what we see of the running back room right now, he might be the best all around skill sets, sure. Right? I mean, because he's got some burst, he's got some power, and he's a really slippery kid, man. Like I've seen breaks and tackles where I'm just like, whoa, like it just kind of shrugs guys off. And you're just like, okay, he's got a little something to him, man. Like he kind of, I think he really understands, like he has good spatial awareness, I think. And I think to your point of the bad habits is, I think that takes away from that, right? Like you're trying to manage chaos when chaos isn't always there, right? Like that's really what it is.
Right.
And honestly, I was worried about that with Kyron going like during the season last year. I was like, oh man, I hope that he doesn't, get out into his own head and just kind of see things when they're not actually there and all that type of thing. And I thought it kind of helped Kyron kind of managing that chaos down the stretch of the season. But I hope that we have a similar kind of move forward with Logan, because I think that every tool's there. I mean, like if you told me, and I know it's a different situation because we might not see him at the beginning of the year due to the injury and everything, but if everything was on equal footing and you told me that Logan Diggs was the top running back in your room, I wouldn't have doubted it, right? Because he's talented enough for sure. And if he comes back, and if you now have the lightning of Chris Tyree, the thunder of Audric Estime, and you also sneak in the slipperiness and the pass catching ability and the all-around
at 215 pounds.
Right. Then you have something special. If you have a special backfield. And I think that backfield could rival any backfield in college football if it all hits to that degree.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I almost kind of hope, this is going to sound terrible, so hear me out. I almost kind of hope that Logan doesn't come back to like game 5 or 6. Okay. Here's why I say that. Number one, I always get super nervous when it's a shoulder injury for a running back. You come back too soon, because sometimes, and again, I don't know the specifics of his injury, but I've seen guys, and I'm not saying this from a medical standpoint, this is an observational comment. I've seen plenty of times where a guy hurts a shoulder, rushes back, and then the shoulder, it just becomes a constant problem. It just constantly getting hurt. It's a weird joint. It's a weird situation. So I get a little nervous about that, right? So part of me, I want to come back later because I want him coming back fully healthy and strong, right? Like do the rehab, build up all the muscles around whatever the injury was, get that sucker fully healed, and then take a couple weeks, right? Like that's how I feel about it. The second aspect of it is, could you imagine adding a fresh pair of legs with that talent like halfway through the season? Crazy. Right? It's like getting a trade deadline guy, You know what I mean? Like you make a trade at the deadline halfway through the year to get, an all-star center fielder or something like that, right? Like
it's like Dexter Williams when he came back, right?
right.
It was just like fresh legs out of
Right, because he
nowhere.
missed 4
Right.
games, right? He didn't
Yeah.
come back
Yeah.
till Stanford, and all of a sudden these Stanford dudes are like, "Who the freaking heck is this guy that just went 45 yards in his first touch of the season?" So you're absolutely right. And Dex was fresh in November. That's exactly my point. Dex was fresh in November. When USC's players are in game 12, Dex isn't like in game 8. You know what I mean? And when you consider some of the blowouts Notre Dame had that year, with the fact that Dex was also still rotating in with guys like Tony Jones Jr., Jafar Armstrong, guys like that, Dex was not getting that huge burden, so he stayed fresh. And it made for a really potent backfield. I mean, just you look at some of Dex that year he carried minimum 13 times in every game he was back. He had over 100 yards in 4 of those games. But a big part of it was, I would argue, Dex is not a 20-plus carry guy normally. And, he had 3 games with over 20 carries. And I think he was able to handle that and not wear down in November because he didn't play the first month of the season. So, yeah, it's a similar situation, and I almost feel like that would time up really nicely for number one to get Logan fully healthy. Now, if he is fully healthy and all those things earlier, so be it. I'll leave that to the medical professionals. I just want to make sure he's not rushed back because they're afraid of the numbers. Sure. That's my big concern. But if he does come back healthy, man, it's going to give you some fresh legs at a time where you're going to need it. And that's what I think makes it interesting. And I think because of recruiting rankings, I don't feel like people appreciate just how talented this group of backs is. It's boy, I tell you what, and that's even without Jadarian Price. So this sophomore group can be really, really good.
Yeah.
We get to one more position. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, again, kind of thinking from a defensive coordinator perspective, like having so many different style backs too coming at you, you're just like, oh man, here comes the changeup again. Yeah. Like I'm just so frustrating to see that type of skill set. Just that blending of styles. It's crazy.
We are going to have a mailbag after we wrap up this portion. We got one more position to talk about, but my friend, Mr. Adamiola, stopped by. We appreciate you very much. Thank you so much for the super chat. He said, no question, just saying hello to my favorite Notre Dame podcasters with unbelievable football acumen in the game. Now it's out there. I absolutely love everything IB. We appreciate you. We appreciate you very much. We were talking about his son earlier today. They came out with the Outland Trophy watch list, and he was not on it. It just blows my mind the lack of respect Jason is getting this year. It's insane. But the good news is I have a feeling he's going to come into the year a little pissed off, which is a good thing for Notre Dame. But thank you so much, Mr. Adamiola. We appreciate you. Got one more position to talk about before we get to the mailbag, and that's tight end. And obviously, sophomore tight end has been a interesting several months. First, Kane Barong gets hurt last October as he was kind of emerging, right, and ready to kind of crack the lineup. Then he gets hurt. Then Mitchell Evans gets a chance to kind of seize that number 2 tight end role. Then he gets hurt this summer. He's going to be out for a good chunk of the year. And then Kane Barong is now cleared and back. Probably not 100% yet, but he's a guy to me, Ryan, that when I look at the sophomore class, he's the one guy that they don't need to step up.
Sure.
Because I think there's enough. He's number one, it's not a starting role, right? And assuming Michael Mayer's healthy, it's not a starting role. There are other tight ends that could do certain jobs. His situation is different because to me, him stepping up doesn't fill a need per se. It's more so if he steps up and forces his way onto the field, he gives you a very, very unique skill set that is going to allow him to go out there and thrive in this offense because he brings so he's about 6'3", 240 plus pounds, I've been told. And I was also told by a source that the 2 times they've done kind of max out on the bench at 225, him and Michael Mayer have tied for the top number both times. He's a strong kid. And if you remember his film, like you see his size, 6'3", 225, you're thinking, pass catcher. Then you pop on his high school film and he's blocking 9 techniques and just driving him off the ball and burying him. He's a really good blocker, but he's also fast and athletic and he can catch the ball. So what does that remind you of? And I hate, look, Tommy Rees had a lot of fun using that role in 2020 with Tommy Tremble. And people like, who could be that Tommy Tremble guy? And the closest thing Notre Dame has ever had to it, in my opinion, in the couple years since, is Kane Barong. If he can step up and fill some of that role where he can lead block as maybe a fullback type of thing, he can be a wing. But he's also a guy that I think can line up and handle himself on the edge. So, and then you bring a legit speed to the table. This is a kid that could provide this offense with a spark that no one's going to be anticipating. No one's going to be coming to the season like, we better be ready to defend Kane Barong. If he breaks out, Ryan, he could be sort of that final really interesting piece to this puzzle as the number 2 or number 3 tight end.
I mean, I feel like I said this about the wide receivers a lot, but it unlocks possibilities. I mean, you want to talk about the ability to flex Michael Mayer out and leaving this kid in line or as a detached wing or vice versa, or being able to use him to your points as a Tommy Tremble style fullback or H-back, however you want to kind of classify him there. He gives you so much variety and so much different personnel options, right? Like a 12 personnel now looks a lot different than maybe what your traditional 12 personnel would look like, because he gives you so much more upside in the pass game, and he can handle himself in the run game. And I mean, I was texting with Brian this morning, and I was just like, why do I feel like Kane Barong's been in the program for so long? It's so weird. He's only
because he's been committed for so long. Yeah, I mean, he's been technically affiliated with Notre Dame for like 4 years. I mean, he committed to Notre Dame when Chip Long was still at Notre Dame.
Wow,
so
that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and Tommy's been the OC. This will be his 3rd year as the offensive coordinator. So, he's been around for a while. But like you said, he's a redshirt freshman. So. Yep. He's a true redshirt freshman, not a COVID redshirt freshman, and a true redshirt freshman. So I think Kane's a player that I'm very curious to see and hear about what he does in fall camp. Yeah, because again, you're not necessarily going in with any expectation of him. Like every guy we've talked about so far, there's a level of expectation for him that you need him to do something this spring. I don't know if Kane has that same kind of pressure. But if he can be that guy and rise to that occasion, boy, he gives you something really interesting at tight end.
It's because, I mean, Michael Mayer gives you so much production that, I mean, you don't really need a secondary option at tight end, right? Like, you just need a guy that can stay in line and block a little bit, maybe occasionally catch a ball in, red zone type of threat. I mean, think of like George Takis. George Takis was a good football player, but he wasn't like a high volume pass receiver. He wasn't a guy that was used a ton as just a receiving option in general in these 2 tight end packages. But Kane Barong, I think, could be, right? Like if he is a guy that you prioritize and he's give you the ability to feel comfortable with him and to be, excited about using him a ton, then he could be a guy that completely flips the script. Maybe Michael Mayer doesn't have as many catches as he normally would, but you also have more variety now, and you still get to that production level either way. So I think Michael Mayer takes away the necessity of needing a Kane Barong as a pass receiver, but the luxury of having him could be a game changer as far as what you can do offensively.
We've got a super chat from Randy Hernandez. He said, thank you very, very much for that, Randy. He said, sophomore class seems more important to the offensive side than the defense. And I think, Randy, that's a great way to wrap it up, before we move on to the mailbag, is that right there. Because as we said, when we talk tomorrow about the defense, it's going to be a lot of guys that you hope step up. And if they don't, it could be an issue. But I don't know if none of them are definite guaranteed that guy's going to start kind of players. Sure. With this class, if you don't have at least 4 sophomores in the starting lineup, there's a problem. I think there's just a problem. And even the rotation guys, they're musts. You have to step up because there just aren't a ton of other options. And so it's going to make for an interesting conversation. So that's going to wrap that part of it. We're going to go to a mailbag here in a second. But before we do, I want to remind y'all to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, check out irishbreakdown.com, sign up for the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Now, Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag. We had a ton of great questions today. Once we finally got everybody kind of zeroed in on topic, there were some really great questions related to this, and then some great questions not related to this topic, which are also okay for us to dive into in the mailbag section. So I want to start things off with Christopher Morgan with a super chat. Christopher, thank you very, very much. This is Happy Tuesday, IB fam. I would like to see more high-tempo offense. Start fast, stay hungry, finish strong for the entire 60 minutes. And don't just settle for a win. make teams triple think game plans for us. Let's dominate. Go Irish. So Ryan, I personally, I love the value that tempo brings to the table. My
Sure.
personal offensive philosophy is more. I'm more in line. People ask, why are you not as critical of Tommy Rees? And there's a million reasons why. But one of the things is his style of offense that we saw last year is more in line with what I believe in. In that I like tempo as a change up. I like to say, I'm not a tempo guy. I'm a pace guy. And
Sure.
I think a pace guy is more of okay, we're gonna move with some urgency, but it's not a great urgency, meaning we're gonna get lined up so that way we can get into our motions and our shifts and run our stuff that way. I'm a big fan of leverage and numbers and isolations and those things happen the way I like them more effectively in a more pro style offense, which is using multiple formations and multiple personnel groupings and things like that, which you can't necessarily do as effectively. I advocated for Notre Dame early in the year last year going to more of a tempo offense because I felt they needed to do it to protect the quarterback. And we started to see Tommy kind of implement that kind of later in the year. But even then, we still saw the motions and the shifts and we saw the using those things to create isolations. That's more in my wheelhouse. So that's kind of why I'm excited to see what he's going to bring this year, because that's just my own personal preference. Now we'll see how it goes this year. But I always feel that you have to have tempo. And we talked about this last week. We'll need to rehash it again, but you always have to have tempo in your back pocket. If you're not a tempo team and you can't go tempo to get out of a funk or to just throw something at the defense, I don't think you're going to battle with all your entire arsenal. I'm just not a believer that you have to go tempo just as a matter of principle. I think there are certain teams like last year that needed to be tempo because they didn't have the line to not be tempo, as we saw. But this year's team, I don't think that need is there. So I'm not as we got to go fast as I was last year because I think the team is different.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot last week, but I think that you need both sides to the coin, right? Like you need to be able to change. I like the word pace that you used, right? I think when I think of pacing, I think of that you can change a pace, right?
Right.
Like you don't have to be full throttle all the time. You can reel it back. You can chew
Right.
clock a little bit. You can work up tempo type of situations. Like that's for me the biggest thing is I want to see an offense that has every layer because I'm a defensive guy at my core. So I think of what bothers me, right? What bothers me is when I can't predict things, when they come out and they throw things at you that you haven't seen, and that works not only with plays and formations, it also works with the pacing of everything. And the faster that you get something in, it can be really frustrating. But then when you start to get used to that pace and then they slow it completely down, you're like, oh, this is making me a little anxious. Like, I don't like this situation right now. So I think you need both things to be successful. There's no right or wrong way necessarily. I just think that if you are a one-trick pony, quote unquote, then you are a lot more predictable in that.
No matter what that trick, no matter the speed or tempo that one trick is. Exactly. And I think that's why you would see some teams that were tempo teams get into the bigger games and struggle to be as efficient as they were in the regular season or against other opponents. So, but love the super chat. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. I do think the second part of what he said is something I'm a big believer in. No matter the tempo you go at, I'm a big proponent of doing what you got to do to start fast. I don't care if it's a script or tempo or whatever. You got to jump. Jump on a team quick, and then when you get that lead, go for the finish, right? Yes. And I think one thing about this Notre Dame football team for years, they have not been good finishers. And it's why they've played so many games that were closer than they should have been. It's why they played, games where they would not be able to win it at the end. And now they've been good finishers in the standpoint of they could out talent some inferior teams to come back and win against Virginia and Temple and teams like Pitt and teams like that. They never should have been in those situations to begin with. And a lot of it was because Notre Dame has not been a great first quarter team for a long time. They just don't come out and just jump all over you. That's what made that 2017 team so unique, because they could come out and just be that team that they were just like, man, they were on you before you didn't even know what happened, and you make a mistake and next thing you know, it's like it's ball game, right? And that's what this team needs to be, Ryan. They have to get back to being a team that just comes out hungry and just we're going to score on you every single time we touch the football. It's just that I don't think you need to be a tempo team to do that. You know, a team that to me is pro style may have a possession or two less per game, but they can still be elite offenses, as we saw with Steve Sarkisian's offense 2 years ago, if you're precise. I'm a big fan of precision over tempo, my personal preference. You know, you can score a ton of points. You're just going to do it on fewer possessions and fewer plays. And that's what I want to see from this football team this year. And it's especially important when you have a team that doesn't have great depth. It's hard to go tempo if you don't have great depth at the skill positions. Because I don't care how in shape you are, you add an extra 100 to 150 snaps on the season, plus you're taking a higher volume of those snaps because your depth isn't good, you become less effective in November. And in this year especially, this is going to be, in my opinion, potentially the most important November Notre Dame has had in a long time, just looking at the schedule on paper. Clemson, USC on the road, Boston College, and Navy, the triple option mixed in with all those other things. You know, BC is going to have a chance to be one of the better teams on the schedule this year. You know, there's a lot of questions I got to answer, so I'm not ready to put them in there yet. But if by the end of the year, BC is the third or fourth best team on the schedule, I'm not going to be shocked if they can answer some questions on the offensive line. But they're going to have some of the best group of skill that Notre Dame's going to face all year. They're definitely in my top 3 or 4 in regards to skill players, right? All around skill players. And so, but where will they be? So that's what makes November super important. And you've got to be healthy. And it's hard to do that when you're going tempo with 5 healthy, 6 healthy receivers, 3 healthy backs, those type of things. So that's another aspect to it as well, Ryan.
I like what Christopher said here with just don't settle. I think that when you're talking about what we saw in the spring practice, I mean, one big thing that when you watch Harry Houston, it's finishing through the whistle, right? Finishing through the man, continue to drive. Don't settle for just a stalemate. You want to be aggressive with it, right? And I feel like I've also seen that with Notre Dame football, right? Where it's just like, just took the foot off the gas early for whatever reason, you know? And it's just not, I don't think that you want to play like that. Like I think you want to teach your players from first string all the way down to guys that are more of, you know, your not practice squad, was not in the NFL, but more of your scout team type players that you got to finish, man. Like when you start something, you're going to finish it to your highest degree. And I don't want you to change your identity. Like I don't want you, I'm not saying go out there and, you know, you're up 40 points and you're still throwing bombs, right? But like there is a thing of like, why are you not being aggressive and letting these kids play, right? Like, why are you completely altering your philosophy as a team? You still need
That's a mentality, Ryan. That's a mentality. And that's, like you said, that's got to be preached all the time. And Bobby Bowden used to catch a lot of flack for running up the score on people because he would put his backup team group in, they would still throw the ball. Now, again, I don't believe in, like you said, I'm running a reverse throwback type of trick play type of stuff. But my whole thing is we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
Sure.
And it's your job to stop us. That's why, I get why people do it. I don't think it's disrespectful, but I almost kind of feel like I would, if I'm getting inside the 3-yard line and there's enough time and we have to run a play, I'm not taking a knee inside the 5. I'm scoring. It's your job to stop us. Now, I'm not getting tackled, then hustling up and getting back up the line of scrimmage to run it again and punch it in the end zone when I'm up 38-3. Not doing that. But every time we snap the ball, I'm going to try to score. The exception being you're out in the field and there's 30 seconds left. That's different, right? But and honestly, to me, it's because you're trying to tell kids it's you finish, right? You go till you finish. And to me, that's a mentality they haven't had, and I would like to see that instilled. And that's why I say, like, every time you step foot on the field, you're not done until you get in the end zone. Sure. And it's a mindset. And I'm hoping that Coach Reese can instill that. And I think having Harry Houston back helps with that. Because when your offensive line is setting that agenda, everybody else better follow. And it's going to be interesting to see how effectively can or cannot pull that off this year.
Especially with the competition mantra, right? Like, and then, because if I was a player and maybe I was a little bit down the depth chart, but I've been competing my butt off in practice all week, and I finally get in a game and you're like, oh, we're calling off the dogs. We're just going to, run the ball 3 times and just get over it.
Right.
Like, no, man, let me compete. Like, I've been working my tail off for this.
And we saw that in Brian Kelly's first year. This is like you look back and like things add up after the fact. But it's like the bowl game and the Sun Bowl game against Miami. Notre Dame's up 27-3 at halftime. That was an opportunity for that game to just be destruction. Well, Miami outscores you 14-6 in the second half because you just took your foot off the gas. It's the last game of the year. Go have some fun. If Miami's players don't want to be there and don't want to stop you, that's on them, not on you. It's not your job to protect the other team. Right now, there comes a point in time, like I felt like Steve Sarkisian in 2016 showed respect for Notre Dame when Notre Dame was just a beat up team. Now, he didn't stop running his offense, though. It's just they weren't throwing bombs. They had that one long drive that took time. He clearly took his foot off the gas. But that was when they were up 42-14, not second quarter up 20-0. You know what I mean? And then I did think Brian Kelly repaid that favor a year later. It's 2014 is when that happened, not 2016. 2014 is when Sarkisian did that. And then Brian Kelly repaid that favor 3 years later when Notre Dame kind of Chip Long threw a bomb when they were up like 42-14, and Kelly was like, no more of that. Because Chip wanted to score 60 on USC in that game, which I understand.
Good for Chip.
But it's just that mindset that you have to have. And I just don't think you can turn that switch on and off. I think you just need to leave it on all the time.
100%.
We have a super chat from John Rich. John says, if they move Blake to guard next to Joe Alda, if they move Blake Fisher to guard next to Joe Alda tackle, how would that compare to McGlinchey and Nelson?
Wow. That's a great question.
Yeah, quite favorably. Sorry, we're looking at projection of what they can be quite favorably. Yeah.
And they're somewhat, I mean, I'm not going to compare Blake Fisher to Quentin Nelson, but I mean, from a physical perspective, that's what you kind of hope that Blake Fisher is, right? Like
what you're trying to say, Ryan, is
what
you're trying to say, and it's okay to say it, is people have enough common sense, they should anyway, to know that when you say he's very similar to Blake Quentin Nelson, you're not saying he's going to be a generational guard that's number 6 overall pick in the draft. No. What Ryan's saying is their styles and what makes them effective is similar. Big, like huge, pretty good athlete for size, really nice natural power, like tackle length inside. So yeah, it would be very similar. And I would argue that, Blake Fisher is not Quentin Nelson. There's no one in college football, in my opinion, that's Quentin Nelson. But he's pretty darn good potential wise. And I would argue that Joe Alt has more upside than Mike McGlinchey did, in my opinion. So it could be comparable. I just don't think we're going to see it. I think we're going to see them as bookends, is kind of how I see this thing playing out for the next couple of seasons. And
agreed.
I'm not opposed to it, and there's been a time where I've advocated for it, but it would require somebody to force Blake away from tackle. If somebody forces Blake away from tackle, then move him. If that means you're going to get your best 5 on the field. David Knight with another super chat. Thank you for this, David. I've heard during games the best adjustments for a team are from the first to second game of the year. Do you agree with that, or fluid all year? I do not agree with that. I have made the case.
Yeah.
I think you can overreact to one game. And I think anyone that has that mantra, to me, is overreacting to one game. I think it's kind of like the biggest adjustments. Like, let's say you come out and you play great out of your minds in the first game, and then you kind of change, and maybe it's in an area you weren't expecting. Maybe you think you're going to be a running team, and you come out in the opener and you just shred the team passing the football. Well, hey, you know what, man? We need to adjust and be more of a passing team. Like, that's an overreaction. Still who you are. Hey, we really struggled with this after one game. Boy, we better adjust. I don't think that's necessarily the case, to go away from what we thought we were going to be. That doesn't mean that you don't make adjustments. Hey, we struggled with this, and sometimes a game may be enough for you to realize, like, you know what, that's not going to work because this kid's not a game day player. That's just kind of rare. You make your adjustments. We played bad here. We got to get better and play better next week, and then build on it, and build on it. So I would say it's fluid all year, David. I think what I would say is you're going to learn more about your team in the first game than any other game, because it's your first chance to really see them in action. But the follow-up adjustments aren't going to be as stark. I really think like you need 3 games under your belt to really know who you are and really know what your strengths and weaknesses are looking like, coming out of it. That's kind of how I look at it.
That's fair.
Christopher Moore with another super chat. He said, let us average 28 to 36 points every game just in the first 22 to 30 minutes. I'd be okay.
Pretty good, yeah.
Sure. Off topic, 354 watching and only 64 likes. We're actually up to over 400 watching now. Come on, hit all thumbs up. yes, Chris, I think anyone who has not hit the like button yet, I remind you now, thank you kindly, please, to hit that like button. We would appreciate that.
Notification bell as well.
Yep, very, very much. So, Chris, thank you for that. Thank you for another super chat. Brandon Plesner says, do you think Buckner can have a similar impact to that of Kyler Murray? And you cannot have any Buckner's going to watch more film jokes at this particular time. So, but in all honesty, do you think he can have a similar impact to that of Kyler Murray?
Yeah. All right. I want to be specific with answering this question, because again, I think people could take this as you're saying that Tyler Buckner could be the first overall pick. No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
What I'm saying is that he does.
Well, how about this Heisman Trophy caliber player that can throw for 3,000 yards and rush for 1,000? Right? How about that?
It's possible. Yeah, I think Buckner does have that upside in him. I think that as he becomes more comfortable, you're going to see more put on his plate, more opportunity kind of put out there for him to take advantage of. But I do think that it is possible. He is that similar type of dual threats. They're obviously different from a body type and style perspective. But I do think, to your question, Brandon, I do think that they could have a similar impact because, I mean, Tyler Buckner is a fantastic athlete and has all the passing upside of the world as well. So I do think that he could have that type of impact overall.
Whenever we've had conversations about Tyler Buckner and who is he comparable to, I think Kyler's always the one that comes to mind the most for me, just because he's a sudden athlete. Kyler's a sudden athlete. I don't think Tyler has Kyler's arm. I don't think Tyler Buckner has Kyler Murray's arm. I think Kyler Murray had a cannon for an arm.
Still does.
And yeah, at Oklahoma. And I don't think Tyler has that. Tyler's got more size than Kyler did as a runner. I think that adds to it. Kyler is real shifty. Tyler's really shifty. Both have very good vertical speed. I think both have pretty clean releases. I think Tyler's is a little quicker now, but the ball just doesn't explode out his hand the way it did for Kyler. That would be the big difference for me between the two as far as passing skill set. But yeah, I think Tyler Buckner certainly has that kind of talent. Now, I think the difference for me is I think Tyler has a longer road to travel to get there than Kyler did. I think Kyler came into college a lot more physically ready than Tyler because the program he played at, Allen, was a great program, still is. And then number two, he played more because of, Tyler Buckner played one season in his final 3 years of high school.
Sure.
That hurt him, his development. Kyler was a guy that threw for 1,000,000 yards in high school, and so actually I'm going to actually look that up because they weren't 1,000,000. Obviously, sometimes we add words or add phrases to things for effect, even if they may not be grammatically correct. They're used for effect. So I want to look up see if his high school stats are provided on Max Preps. I'm very curious about that. They are not. He threw for over 8,300 yards in his last 2 years and 100 touchdowns in his last 2 years. So I don't know what he did before that. And he rushed for 2,800 yards his last 2 years, which is very similar to what Tyler Buckner's numbers would have been like had he not been injured. But Kyler Murray did that against much better competition than Tyler did. So Tyler Buckner to me is a guy that I viewed as if he played his senior year would have been a top 25 player for me coming out of high school. Kyler Murray was a guy that was a top 5 player. So very similar in style. I think Kyler's just a little bit more dynamic than Tyler Buckner.
Here's a question though. You saw both of them coming out of high school. So who watched more film in high school?
See, there you go.
You thought it was a serious question for a second, didn't you?
There you go. I was like, okay, I'm ready for this. All right. Oh, that? Yeah. I hope that Tyler Buckner never has to sign a contract demanding that he watch a certain amount of film. So
that's like I remember when Eddie Lacy signed a deal with the Packers, and it had a certain weight that he had to be. It's underneath.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign.
Nope.
Ray Panconi asked, did I hear correctly that Ronan Hannafin canceled his official visit to Clemson? That is not correct. There's a lot not correct with that, Ray, if that's what someone told you. Number one, Ronan Hannafin already took an official visit to Clemson. He did it on the weekend of June 5th. So nobody can take official visits this week. Ronan is not visiting Clemson today, as some Clemson sites reported, but I can tell you with pretty good certainty that he never scheduled a visit to Clemson this week. So you can't cancel something that you never said. What was happening is Clemson writers, like Notre Dame writers like ourselves, sometimes you're not getting information from a player or his parent, so you have to look for other sources, and sometimes those sources may be affiliated in some way with the program that you cover. And so you will hear things like, hey, we're trying to get this kid to do this. And then it's kind of like the telephone game, or maybe it's just people want to get page views or clicks or seem like they're in the know. You then report it as this is going to happen. And that's what was happening with Ronan Hannafin, is there were some people that were rightly reporting. I believe Anna Hickey, and I don't think her last name is Hickey anymore, but she was reporting that, because people were sending me the different things. She was reporting that Clemson is trying to get Ronan Hannafin to visit, which is correct. They were trying. Other people reporting it as if it was going to happen or he had scheduled it. That was incorrect. And so I think that, and then of course, somebody tells somebody who tells somebody who tells somebody that he's visiting and it's an official. That's just not how it was. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have sincere interest in Clemson, and that is the school he's having a difficult time deciding between. I just want to make sure that it's clear that no legitimate Clemson reporter that was sticking to the facts said that he was scheduled to visit, which would be required if you're going to cancel it. We do believe and we know that Clemson was trying to get him to visit, but Notre Dame was also trying to get him back on campus this week, and to no success, because he's trying to remove it, and just he has all the intel and the data he needs. Now it comes down to decision-making mode for him. So I just want to make sure that that's out there and clear so that everybody understands. And Ray, I appreciate you bringing that up in the chat so that way we could address it. I really do appreciate that, because you're not the only person wondering that. And so my criticism, Ray, is not of you. I'm glad you brought this question up. It's just more of how some of these things get covered and get handled. And it's increasing more and more and more, Ryan. And I'm not quite sure why. I have some ideas, but I'm not sure why. But it is what it is. Mm-hmm. Connor O'Doherty, do you guys think that a healthy Diggs or Estime has higher upside as a college back? I think I know your answer to this, but I'm going to let you answer it first, Ryan.
I actually think it's a conversation. I would take Estime just because with the size profile, I think added into everything. But if anybody said Diggs, I would be like,
that's not who I thought you were going to say.
You thought
I thought you were going to say Diggs. Yeah. And for me, it's Diggs.
I'm an Estime guy.
I think the reason is I think Diggs can do more. And in today's game, there's a greater need on the guy that can do more, right? And that's my thing. And Estime is maybe – I'll say this. Estime is the better pure runner. Diggs is the better back, because that encompasses the whole thing.
Sure.
And I would say that the gap between Diggs and Estime in the pass game is greater than the gap between Diggs and Estime in the run game, is why I would say that.
It's interesting.
So,
right.
Yep. But as Ryan said, if Ryan wanted to say, I disagree, my conversation ends there, because I think it is close. And I think part of it can come down to what your personal preference for what your priorities are for a back. The reality is they're both really good football players. And if they both reach their potential, Notre Dame is going to be loaded at running back. And I hope that someday we're having this conversation of who's better, Diggs or Estime. Like we could argue who was better, Reggie Brooks or Jerome Bettis. I hope we're having that conversation someday, based on what they're doing on the field, not their potential and projection. Because I think a case could be made for, like, I agree. The one thing we definitely agree on, Ryan, a case could be made for either guy. There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
Kyle Wade says pregame song questions. I'm more of a metal fan, so my two songs for the Notre Dame pregame would be "Creeping Death" by Metallica and "Meridian" by August Burns Red. What would you add to the playlist? So can I say something about Metallica real quick?
Sure.
I don't really know a lot about Metallica. I'm not a metal fan, but for some reason, there's been this thing popping up on my feed about a week ago, and it was a video from 1991 when Metallica played in Moscow. This is right after the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union was collapsing.
Yep.
And it's like, I saw the video. There's like 2 million people in the audience. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. They were playing Enter the Sandman. No, they had a whole show, but in the video was Enter the Sandman. What kind of stage presence do you have to keep your cool and perform in front of, there's millions of people and helicopters, and you're in the freaking Soviet Union. You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty wild. But other than that, that's that. And the fact that they play that song before Virginia Tech games is about my extensive knowledge of Metallica. But what would you add to the playlist, Ryan? For me, it's a lot of pregame, was mostly Tupac and Wu-Tang. I loved Biggie Smalls, but he wasn't like a pregame guy. It was more Tupac. It was more Biggie Smalls. In college, I had some Jay-Z's Reasonable Doubt on there. That I still say that's his best album by far, is his first album. I love Jay-Z's first album. So that made up a lot of, and I'd have a song here. I had a Mobb Deep song that'd be on there. There was a Busta Rhymes song I really liked on there. That would be on my playlist. But yeah, it's mostly Tupac and Wu-Tang.
See, I was a little bit different of a pregame guy. I went a little crazy on the field, so I actually like to chill before games. I don't like to get too amped before game time. Right. So I would listen to like some alternative stuff like the Gorillaz, the Killers, Modest Mouse, something like that. Right. Like I kind of just want to chill out a little bit, you know. Right. Like I'm not a get pumped to get pumped. I'm going to get pumped either way on the field. I want to kind of.
And that's why I listen to what I listen to. That's why I didn't listen to Biggie and I listened to Tupac and Wu-Tang, and why I like the Mobb Deep, and I because it's the rhythm. Okay, I'm getting into rhythm. I'm getting into like that mental place. I was not like put on Onyx, like, or something where it's like, something that, rap where you're like really trying to get hyped up. And, it's just stuff that I want to get my mind in that right place. And just the music that I would listen to was stuff that would help me to just find my mental spot, not the stuff to, like you said, Ryan, not to fire me up because I was a quarterback. So it was more of like, Outkast was somebody just put Outkast, Goody Mob. Goody Mob was an interesting group, but they were not on my pregame list. Outkast had some stuff on there. They would have a song littered in here and there as well. They had some good stuff back when I was coming out.
Outkast is cool. I could dig
that. ATLians was coming out. I think my senior high school, I think is the one that came out around then. That had some, but again, it was, what is Outkast? That album, it's not a lot of hype music. It's there's the beats are phenomenal. Like so another rapper that I would listen to in college, Guru, right? I listened to him because I didn't necessarily love him, but you'd have DJ Premier was the one putting down the beats, and it was just such a like, okay, I can get into a rhythm, I can get into a flow with that type of music. Right. And that's, I was trying to get into that space of focus and being in that rhythm. That's the kind of stuff that I would get into. And, that's why that stuff was, anything with Primo in it was something that would get me into that right place.
Were you a Beastie Boys guy too?
No,
you'd be a Beastie Boys
no. To me, that's more like rock than it is rap for me.
Fair.
I mean, they got some, like, to me, that's a party song group. You know what I mean? Like Snoop Dogg. I'm not a big Snoop Dogg fan, but if I'm at a party, it's going to be Snoop Dogg playing, right? Because you can dance to it, and it's getting me to a different place.
Sipping on gin and juice, yeah.
It's more of it's more of a song that you're going to play at a party than you're going to play like when I'm trying to get in my right mental space before a football game. So very good question. I always love questions like that.
Mm-hmm.
Salty Virginia Peanut says, are either the Bowens, Braylon James, and or the great one, Jaden Greathouse, attending the barbecue with Novosad? I thought I read that they might be, but they are not on the visitors list. So Jaden Greathouse should be on the visitors list. I believe we added him. Maybe we forgot. Bowens will not be there, I don't believe. Peyton won't, and Braylon won't either. Braylon was going to come, but they had a family function that came up that kept them from being there. But I believe Jaden Greathouse will be on campus. Yes. With Austin Novosad today. Is that correct, Ryan? Am I correct on that one?
Last time that we heard, yes. Yep.
Okay. Jared Ginn says, I believe the difference between, this is more of a comment. I believe the difference between Notre Dame having a good season, 2 to 3 losses, to having a great season, 0-1. I think he probably meant to go like 0-1 losses, is greatly dependent on the offensive line and defensive line. Do you all agree with that? Yeah. Yeah, both lines. I mean, we didn't talk about defense today, but yes, I think Notre Dame cannot be a great team if they don't get really good line play on both sides of the ball. There are other 100%. Factors on top of it. It's never just about that, but that's a big key. Like, I don't think the lines in 16 and 16, I don't think the lines in 2016 were terrible. I don't. The offensive line had 2 All-Americans on it. The defensive line in 2016 had some good players on it. It was the rest of it was garbage, and the coaching was garbage. Is the difference. Here's one for you, Ryan. Who do you compare Marcus Freeman to? I compare him to Pete Carroll.
Wow, that's an interesting. Is that, you think that comparison is just for being like a player's coach type of feel?
That's
Is
going to
that
be
where
my
that
guess.
from? Okay,
Like outgoing personality, players coach, defensive coordinator. I think those are the comparisons.
that's interesting.
Pete had like several years as head coach in the NFL before he came to Notre Dame. So, but
Yeah.
I'll say this: I could see some similarities to Pete, energetic. Because here's where I think it comes down to: what's the one when we've talked about Marcus Freeman wanting to build competition? What's the example we use a lot? It's what Pete did at USC. Because for all the stuff about Pete's outgoingness and players coach and all that, his program was built on competing every single day. A lot like what Nick Saban has done at Bama since then. Building on that is we're going to compete every single day. I mean, Pete Carroll was said to have had some very physical practices at USC, which they had to, when you're talking about trying to build the team that they're trying to build. So in that regard, I could say yes, but that's kind of in that, and they're both defensive coordinators with outgoing personalities. That's about where my comparisons would end.
I don't really have a great one though for that one. If you're asked, I think that's kind of what I like about Freeman is that he's kind of unique in how he presents himself. So I don't think I have a great one though. So
people aren't going to like this, but I think the guy he compares most to is Dabo. Now, the way in which it manifests looks different because one's a kid grew up in Ohio and the other guy's grew up in Alabama. So they're going to look different. But what is the thing about Dabo? Dabo has a very engaging, genuine personality that his players find him to be very genuine, very excitable, a guy that they love. Like I said, it manifests itself differently. Great recruiters, guys that understand how important it is to compete, understand how important it is to find the right fit from a recruiting standpoint, not just recruit the best players. I think that's probably where, as a head coach, where I think if there's a coach that I would say he's most similar to of what we know now, it would be Dabo. Just because, like you said, Dabo has a very unique personality. Now, Dabo and Marcus don't have the same personality, but from an impact standpoint, that's where I think the similarities are, where very dynamic personality, very unique personality, dogs on the recruiting trail, but not people obsessed with finding the highest ranked player, but the best player that fits what we're trying to build. Believe in competition, believe in fundamentals, because that's something else that Clemson hasn't gotten enough credit for. Very well coached football team when they were really rolling. They really were. They didn't just go out talent everybody they played. I mean, they did in the ACC, but it wasn't just because of that. They didn't beat Bama because they had way better players than Bama. They didn't beat Oklahoma. They didn't beat Ohio State 31-0 because they had way better players. They were coached extremely well, especially early on. And so I think that would probably be the one. Again, manifestation of their personalities is different. I think Dabo's a lot more outgoing verbally than Marcus Freeman is, or Coach Freeman is more, I'd say, somewhat stoic in how when he talks, it's very intentional, very purposeful. But, so how they engage it. But I think that comes from their backgrounds. Midwestern kid from a military family compared to a dude from Alabama. You know what I mean? But as far as what's behind it, the substance behind it, I think is very similar. And I think that would be the guy that I would most compare him to. I know there's a lot of people who don't like that because a lot of people don't like Dabo. I like Dabo a lot. I think he's a heck of a coach. So
I like Dabo too. I like Dabo too.
Yep.
There is like this really weird anti-Dabo thing that kind of floats around a little bit.
It's strange.
I know he says some things occasionally. You're just kind of like, all right, it's a little out of I don't know what the word is exactly, but he's not really in tune, I guess, with some of his players at times. But
but
whatever.
We think that.
Sure.
Right. But 7 of his 10 assistant coaches are former players.
Sure.
So, I mean, from the outside, we might think that he's not in tune with his players, but that's not. I mean, Christian Wilkins, did he seem out of tune with Dabo when he came back for a 5th year because he wanted to win another championship? No, right? I think it's the perception of how he's viewed by his players because he doesn't toe the line that the media thinks he should toe or certain people think he should toe. But it doesn't really matter. Dabo, I think, has a much better feel for what his players think than maybe that we do. But I do think the perception is there, Ryan, and that's why people don't like him because he doesn't say what you're supposed to say in certain situations.
And I don't think Dabo really cares what the media perception is on him. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think he cares so much about.
Neither does Nick Saban, and I respect that.
100%.
I do. I respect that. Toe Jam says, hello, IB friends. The worthless ESPN 300 dropped Arch Manning as their number one prospect. How much did Keon Keeley's performance against him last season have to do with that? Zero. Number one, they've had a rankings update since then. Between that game and this update, they've had other updates, so none, and they dropped Keon a spot. So I doubt that it had any impact at all. I will say this, as much as I hate ESPN and think their stuff is garbage, they have a very high opinion of Notre Dame's class.
I was about to say, because I looked at their update, and then I looked at your article as well, and there wasn't a ton that I disagreed on. Like I disagreed, like Keon's a little lower than he probably should be. Like there's,
but it's not like they got him 70th.
Bowen, right? Yeah. Like Drake Bowen's probably a little lower than he should be, but like for the most part,
he's still 89th.
Okay. Yeah,
right.
They were okay.
I mean, you had Keon at 23, Peyton Bowen at 30. It's fair. Braylon James at 54. I would say that's probably a little higher than I would have Braylon James. You had Micah Bell at 82. It's fair. Jaden Greathouse at 87. Fair. Oh, Charles Jagasaw at 77. A little lower than I would have him, but you put him and Braylon kind of an in between. I think Braylon's maybe a tad higher. Charles is maybe a little lower, and you're right on. Micah Bell in the top 100. That's now 2 outlets. He made the biggest jump. He jumped 48 spots, 46 spots. From like 128 to 82. So it'd be 46 spots, right? And so he had a big jump. He's now ranked in the top 100 by 2 different services, and yet still the number 67 player in the country in Texas, according to On3. I'm going to keep saying that until they change it. You had Greathouse at 87, Drake Bowen at 89, and Brennan Vernon at 108. Now, I'd put Brennan a little higher, but that's one of the more fair rankings of him. And they didn't drop them. They dropped them like 3 or 4 spots, which we've always said, like every kid dropped like 4 or 5 spots for Notre Dame, just about like after the first few. But it was more, those aren't drops in my opinion. If you're dropping, like I've said, if you're dropping 5 to 10 spots, it's not so much that you have a different opinion of you. It's just some other guys are being evaluated higher. Most of them, Christian Gray fell a couple spots. He's 150 though. Devin Houston's 185. That's very fair. Boubacar is 217. I'd say that's probably a tad low, but fair. It's in the wheelhouse because he's very raw. Rico Flores at 222, very fair. Jade Lamar at 254, very fair. Jeremiah Love's 95, very fair. Jaden Osbury's 38, very fair. They didn't have Austin Novosad in the top 300. That's off. But that's not an anti-Notre Dame thing. I think that's inaccurate. They don't have Ronan Haniff in the top 300. I don't think that's accurate. There's some other rankings that I was like, I don't like that. But they weren't as insane as they normally are. And now what I don't know is maybe there's a lot of Notre Dame dudes that are there's 2 reasons why I think ESPN has a more accurate ranking of Notre Dame's recruiting. One is I'm going to assume that some of these guys have not committed to All-Star games yet or have committed to theirs. Number 2, Notre Dame has a lot of kids from states that they tend to overrate, mainly Texas. And I've always felt ESPN is obsessed with Florida and Texas recruits. Always has been. Well, Notre Dame's benefiting from that this year. And they don't – not every kid from those states is inflated. But if a kid's good from Texas, they're going to give him a different look than a kid from Ohio or Indiana or Illinois, in my opinion. So I think that factors into it as well. But it worked out for Notre Dame in this instance. They have more top 100 players and more top 300 players than any team in the country. And that's only going to grow, as I said, because 2 of the kids that we think Notre Dame leads for that are going to decide the summer are also both top 100 guys, Jaden Osbury and Jeremiah Love. So they're not slowing down, folks. They're not slowing down. Garen Knutson says, what does it take to change the mentality of an offensive line to be more violent at the point of attack? What will make the O-line nasty in the run game? I'm gonna make it simple. Hire Harry Hiestand, which ties into the philosophy. Look, what does it take? Ryan said it earlier. It's about instilling a mindset. So when you watch Coach Eastand's teams practice, they will force linemen to finish every drill off. They will make him block a guy at least 10 to 20 yards down the field, depending on the drill they're doing. And it's just every single thing that they do and just never settling. It's never good enough. It's got to be better. It can be better. Got to be tougher. Got to be stronger. And then when they don't give you that, you immediately correct it. And with Coach Easton, he corrects it with some force. You know what I mean? But the biggest thing, too, is he teaches how to do it. That's the biggest thing. I can tell you, got to be tough, got to be tough, got to be tough. But I got to teach you how to be tough. I got to teach you how to play with the right technique to be violent. right? Like I can want to be violent, but I could then also lead with my face every time I block you. That's not going to be as effective as a guy that's bringing his hands when he comes, right? I mean, I could want to be violent and hit you as hard as I can and then stop my feet. And
It's
I'm not going
over.
to be great, right?
That's the stalemate versus finishing aspect of what I was talking about earlier.
But it goes beyond the philosophy is fine, and that's got to be there. And I don't think the philosophy was there in the past, Ryan, especially the years where you didn't have Chris Watt. But then you have to follow it up with proper teaching on how to carry out that philosophy. And that's what makes Harry Hiestand special. It's not that he believes in being physical and no other offensive line coaches do. It's he believes it and then he teaches it and then demands that it be done every single time, every single day. And I think that's a big part of what makes him
it's like any
special.
It's like any belief that you have, right? Unless you live it and you have practically, just practice it, then it's not really having the full effect, right? Like you have to, the offensive linemen have to believe what Coach Hiestan's teaching them, right? And that's kind of why they do the drills every single day. That's why they talk the same terminology every single day, because that's something that needs to be instilled in you.
Agree. It's a great reason why you hire Harry Hiestand. Randy Hernandez with another super chat. Brian, good luck with the new platform I'm in. I appreciate that, Randy.
Love it.
Very, very much. Let's see what we've actually gotten up to. We've added about 40 some people since we started. So yes, we appreciate that very much. So we always appreciate people joining our channel. I'm going to put that link into the bottom again. So I appreciate people going there and helping us get to 1,000 subscribers. So thank you very much for that, Randy. Alan Watson with a super chat. Is the weakness of this year's team just reps?
Meaning like
experience?
Lack of experience?
Yeah, I think so.
That's what I took it as. Yeah,
I wouldn't call it a weakness, though. I think the weakness of this team is kicking. That's the only spot that I view as a weakness. I think what I would say, Alan, and I think we're on the same page, Alan, I would say the biggest concern I have is a lack of reps at some very important positions. Now, the difference between me and the last guy that was in charge of the football program is I don't think that's an excuse for not being successful. I think it's what you have to address. What you focus on in the offseason and in camp needs to be to overcome that, not to make as an excuse and then just lean into it all year. That's the difference. But yes, I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be addressed and that's like Ryan said earlier, right? What we're talking about with like protecting certain things. There's things you can do early in the season to not put the same pressure on us on a first start of his career, Tyler Buchner, that you will on the 30th start of his career, Tyler Buchner.
Sure.
Right? Because you're aware of the fact that this is where he is, and we're going to coach to that and then coach him beyond that as the season goes on is what I would say, Ryan. Do you have any other kind of thoughts on that as far as maybe if there's anything else that you might think be a bigger concern for you?
I would say this, Alan. I think your question, and I agree with it, is there is an inexperience to a couple of key positions, like Brian kind of indicated. I mean, it was in this podcast, right? If you listen to the first portion, talked about quarterback, we talked about the two tackles, and Notre Dame is going to be depending on sophomores, which Tyler Buchner has not started a football game for Notre Dame. Joe Alt started a few football games for Notre Dame, and Blake Fisher has played in 1.5 football games in general. So there is going to be some uneasiness because there are a lot of positions where are very important, and you have sophomores, and a couple of them are, guys that are going to be making their first major action as far as from a starting perspective. So but to your point, Brian, I think you can't steer away from it, right? Like if you have true belief in those players, got to play them, right? Like they need live bullets. It needs to happen eventually. So I don't think that you should be afraid of that inexperience. I think it's just something where you have to understand that, like, hey, early on in the season, maybe this player, I might need to protect him a little bit more with this, if it's an offensive tackle you're not feeling great about, maybe I might need to leave the tight end in occasionally. Maybe I need to chip. Maybe I need to, kind of slide my protection his way to help him out. Like those types of things. There's always ways to help. But I think more than anything, you can't be afraid to play your talents, because I think that we've seen teams. I mean,
and coach
Alabama's
to
not
it. Right.
Yeah, Alabama's not not afraid to play freshmen. Clemson's not afraid to play freshmen or sophomores. Why should Notre Dame be? They have to be on that same level eventually.
And people say, well, you got to earn it. Well, that's one of the biggest misconceptions, because if you're not given the opportunity to earn something, you can't earn it. Right. I mean, that's the reality of it. You earn opportunities. Not necessarily. That's a great slogan. That's not always practically how things pan out, right? You have to be given opportunities to earn certain things in sports, right? I could be the greatest at something, but if nobody will hire me to do it, then okay, well, I either going to not do it or going to go start on my own, right? I mean, well, these kids can't leave and go start their own teams. You know what I mean? Like you have to be given an opportunity uh, to then go earn that opportunity. So it's two different opportunities today. Is how I would look at it, Ryan. I'm not sure if beyond that. I mean, it's never there's a lot of slogans in sports that sound great, but in practicality, they're just not quite as true as they're not blankets, right?
Right.
I mean, you have to prove yourself, right? You have to earn your playing time. That's true, but to act as if your mere presence in the program is an earning of that opportunity is not accurate.
I mean, we've heard about a lot of recruits that like they want to be promised positions before they even get on campus, right? I mean, it's not always true. It's just not always true.
Right. Christopher Morgan with another super chat. Darn it, all three of you talk about possible multiple roles per player and scheme. I feel like Notre Dame should hire you three as advisors. You have my votes. I kind of like what I'm doing now. I kind of like what I'm doing now. I appreciate that.
But we can keep doing what we're doing now. We just be consultants. Though.
There you go.
So
there you
that's
go.
a little side hustle.
There you go. Side hustle. I love it. I love it. Travis with super chat. Can you guys give us any insight to how the staff? Sorry, I'm just looking over Ryan saying being a consultant for Marcus Freeman and the staff is a side hustle. That was so great. Sorry, Travis. Can you guys give us any insight to how the staff interacts with specific kids like Wingo, Scott, Novosad, etc., compared to the rest of the group? I will say this, Travis. I don't think you can. I don't think you can interact in a way you're interacting any different with those three kids because there are so many big time kids on campus. Like you just left off 6 or 7 kids that are very important to this class. I think what you do is you have targeted things for all those kids. And sometimes when you treat all the kids similarly for the kind of kid that Notre Dame wants, that's actually going to help you as much. Like, where that you're not treating a kid bad and you ignored this kid and then that kid's kind of complaining about it. And then that kind of spreads. I think what you do is I think there are targeted messages in your interactions that are meant to be impactful for that. There may be some things that you do from a part of the trip aspect that is different. Maybe you make some time with Tommy Reese to spend a little bit extra time breaking down film with Dawson Novosad, right? And so he may not be there. But when he's around the other kids, he needs to interact in a very similar fashion to those kids. I think that's very important for a place like Notre Dame. So how they interact should be the same for all the kids. Treat them all with respect and love. You love all of them, right? And and you're excited that you're thankful that they're on campus, and you're excited to show them what you have to offer. The what you do is where I think the biggest difference is, Ryan.
The word that always gets brought up with recruits, whether it's 2023 or 2024, that I've spoken to is authentic. Mm-hmm. And I think that you don't need to put on a facade or change your personality in order to kind of fill it, right? Like I think there's different ways. Like if me and Brian have completely different personalities, that's okay, right? We can still get to a good place because there's still common ground that we can come to, right? In that situation. So I don't think that coaches are like morphing their personalities to try to, fit in better with Ryan Wingo's personality or an Austin Novosad's personality. I just think that it's preaching an authentic approach. And this is the vision we have for you. And, to paint a good environment around you, right? Like I think that's the end all be all. I don't think you have to kind of change your personality to fit with certain recruits personally. That's just me though.
I agree. Archer 452, Ryan, this is a personal question. Ryan, if you don't mind sharing, yes. What is the tattoo on your right arm? I too have a tattoo on my right arm on the forearm, not the inside.
So I started a half sleeve a couple years ago, and it is not finished, but it is a Notre Dame centric tattoo that has Touchdown Jesus on there. I don't know if you could see that. I need to turn it this way, I guess. I have the leprechaun, I have the ND, I have a shamrock, and I have the play like a champion underneath, but it is not finished yet. But it is a love to Notre Dame football. So
I'm going to be excited when I see the IB tattoo on the arm. That's when I'm going to get excited.
Hey, man, sign me to a 10-year deal and you got it done.
Well, I mean, getting a tattoo would kind of forced my hand there. Like, well, I got to sign the guy now. I got a tattoo.
That's true. That's very true.
All right, Quinn Kelly with a super chat. Will Blake Fisher fall in the draft when the time comes due to the fact he plays right tackle?
No, not anymore. Not anymore. It won't be, because the difference between right tackle and left tackle have become less and less kind of. It's something where right tackle is very important. Left tackle is, you could still argue, is a little more important if you have a right-handed quarterback for the blindside aspect of it, but I don't think that they're going to hold it against him, because I think, especially with Blake Fisher, he has traits where I think you could look at him and say he could be a left tackle if we want him to be a left tackle, right? Like, it might look a little different than some, but I think that he could still project favorably there. So I just don't think the difference between right tackle and left tackle is as vast as it once was. So I don't think it'll be it might drop you a couple spots, but it's not going to be like oh my God, you're dropping half a round or you're dropping a round type of thing. I just don't see that situation happening.
Can I ask two questions? Number one,
yes.
Would you say that being a right tackle, if you're a dominant right tackle, would you say that you can still be a top 5 pick?
Yes, I think Lane Johnson was the number 3 overall pick, if I remember correctly, and he was a right tackle coming out of Oklahoma, and he's only ever played right tackle. So it's very possible, as long as you have the traits that you could be a dominant football player at the end of the day.
And part of it's team need. I get that too.
100%.
Second question I have, would you say that right versus left is more impactful when it comes to negotiating your second contract? It's going to make a bigger difference in the numbers that you get, as opposed to more than it affect your draft status.
Yes. Yeah. I think that that's a great way to put it. Is, if I was Blake Fisher and I had my eyes forward to the NFL, I would probably want to be a left tackle in college, because then it's easier to project forward to that, right? So a left tackle is going to make more money than a right tackle. Even that, I think, is becoming less and less of a difference as far as like the price tag, but it's still, left tackles are just naturally going to get paid more. So yeah, I would think so.
I also don't think
that's like the being labeled a tight end versus wide receiver thing that we see now with like Darren Waller and stuff. It's just like, so
I would also say that I would argue that I'm curious to see how Blake Fisher's perceived when he's going to the draft, about whether or not some teams might actually view him as someone who can play left tackle.
That's what what I was saying is I think that he has the traits where you could project it. It's like Lane Johnson's an interesting one, because Lane Johnson could absolutely play left tackle. It was just, it's just like he's so good at right, why would we move him type of conversation. But I'm sure there would have been some teams that would have been like, we're moving you to left tackle.
Yep. Nicholas Moore. This is an interesting two-parter. He says, I miss Tavon Coney, top 5 linebacker in the Kelly area, in my opinion. He says, it's always baffled me that Tavon didn't work out in the NFL. I truly don't understand why he didn't pan out. I want to address the first part of this. I'd be hard-pressed not to have Tavon in the top 5 of linebackers under the Kelly era. And I think if I'm having to, like, okay, the easy ones, Manti, Jalen, Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, right?
We're counting Rovers then, definitely?
Yes, because I count as a linebacker. Okay. So that'd be my 3. Yep. My number 4 would probably be Drew Tranquill.
True, yeah.
And then my number 5 would be Tavon. I would, because Tavon was very productive for multiple seasons and played Mike and Will. And I would argue the best linebacking duo, the best inside linebacker tandem that Notre Dame had in Brian Kelly's tenure was Drew and Tavon in 2018. Like, that was a really, really good linebacking core, And I would say the 2017 group that had Drew at Rover with Tavon, Greer, and Niles inside was also pretty darn good as far as just an entire unit. Because, like, Jalen never played with other great linebackers or other good linebackers even, really. Manti didn't even really play with that. He was Dan Fox and Carlo Calabrese. I'd say that group of Tavon, Greer, Niles, and Drew at Rover, which is the 2017 linebacking group, was pretty darn good. And the best 1-2 punch inside was Drew and Tavon in 2018.
I was trying to think if there would be anybody that would even have a fight for number 5. You mentioned Niles Morgan. He was a good football player.
But he's not. There's a big drop-off between him and those other guys,
Right. I can't even think of anybody else that might be even in the conversation. So he might be 5 by default.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's guys that played. Dan Fox played a lot of football. I think Danny
player,
Spahn would have had a much better career if not for injuries. He was a very like a really not talked about, but really important piece to that 2012 defense. And then the other part of it is, do you count, like, technically Prince Shimbo was a linebacker, but because they were a 3-4 team. But I don't count him as a linebacker. I don't count Darius Fleming as a linebacker. I think they were more edge players to me.
Oh, they're edges, yeah.
Yeah, like Carlo was really good in 2010. Carlo and Manti in 2010, before Carlo got hurt, was a really good inside linebacker too. Now, they benefited from, at the time, playing a bunch of teams that year that were geared towards their style of play.
Of the world,
right?
Yeah.
But I think that's twofold. Number one is I think that group of 5 was really good. Because, like, Niles was a good player at Notre Dame, multi-year starter. I would say that Drew White played a lot of football. He was very productive at Notre Dame. But yeah, I do think that there's a bit of a drop off between that top. I'd say that top 6. Like, Greer Martini was never a full-time starter. James Onwualu had 1 year as a starter, was never great. Osmar had 1 good year as a linebacker.
I was about to say Osmar had 1 good year.
Yeah, but he was not good in other years. Dan Fox was steady and solid, just unspectacular. So there's a lot of stuff like that, but I think there's a pretty big drop off between the top 6. I'm gonna move right past that, between the top 6 and the rest of the guys on that group. I could just be completely forgetting somebody, but that would
I like James Onwualu, but I agree with you.
Yeah, he was a starter for 1 year on a terrible defense. But yeah, he was a good football player. Now to Tavon in the NFL. Tavon was actually not very athletic. Tavon was a downhill guy, and Tavon was pretty instinctive. He was also very strong at the point of attack. Tavon could pack a punch at the ball.
Oh, he didn't miss a workout.
No, especially upper body day. He did not miss curl day or bench day or any other upper body workout day. Tavon was very stiff athletically, and I've shared this before, and this is an example of it. We were at the combine after the Notre Dame's pro day after the 2018 season. And there's a drill that they will put linebackers and DBs through, but especially linebackers, where they will have them line up on the sideline and they will have them backpedal on like the 25-yard line. So it's like a straight line. And then as they're backpedaling, they will then turn them. They will tell them to flip their hips. And the goal is you're supposed to flip your hips, right? And then come back and keep backpedaling and flip your hips. And the goal is to see how tight a guy is or how loose a guy is. Well, when Drew Tranquil did it, he stayed on that yard line. He was like flipping his hips, like smooth, and it looked, like that's an athletic dude, right? Tavon turned it into a zigzag drill, and not on purpose, because if you're tight and you're not a real flexible athlete, when you turn and you're tight, it's your whole body has to turn, and it's going to take you off that line. That's why they have you drop off that line. And so when Tavon did it, it was like this. And it's not what it's supposed to look like, because he was very tight-hipped. But that's not the only reason Tavon didn't get drafted. There were some other reasons that were not football related, and I'll just leave it at that. And that Tavon didn't. And he wasn't good enough, or athletic enough, I should say, at that level to overcome those things. Right? Like, you can overlook Reuben Foster's background because he's a freaky athlete and a really talented player. Tavon wasn't good enough to overcome those things. That's just simple as that. Anything you'd like to add to that, Ryan?
Now, you know a lot more about his background as far as the off the field stuff. I know we've talked about it, but I will say the biggest thing for me is that was extremely tight. Like, change of direction was just not great. He was never going to be an asset in the passing game. Right. He would have had to been just a early down run stopper and made his living on special teams.
And that right there is why the NFL is not a projection for him, because college football is still very much a running game. Even teams that throw it a lot, like Ohio State and Oklahoma, still would run for 200 yards a game, right? Mm-hmm. In the NFL, teams just, it's to the point now where outside the Titans, does anybody really care about running? It's like 7,000-yard backs in the NFL last year. You know what I mean? Like, in a 17-game season. So it's just a different league, and that first and second down back doesn't have a lot of value. It just it doesn't. And
Nope.
Tavon, if 15, 20 years ago, well, I'll say this, 20 years ago, Tavon still gets drafted because his value to what the league was 20, 30 years ago would have been a whole lot different. He wouldn't have been a high pick, but he would have got drafted because they would have overlooked his other stuff because he'd have brought value. Manti is a top 15 pick 20, 30 years ago.
100%.
Right? The game has evolved. And that's what hurt Tavon because as a downhill in the box guy, Tavon was a stud his last year at Notre Dame. And really his last two, because people forget he led the team in tackles, I believe, in 2017, and he wasn't even a full-time starter. He was in that rotation with Greer and Niles, and Drew was outside of Rover. He was a really good player. Really good player. And you are correct. He did not miss a workout. Like he did not miss. He definitely does not miss in curl day. There's no doubt.
Body Beautiful was about Tavon Coney.
Yes, there's no doubt. All right, Seth Clark with a recruiting question. What would you grade? This is an easy answer. What would you grade a wide receiver class in 2024 that has Ryan Wingo, Cam Williams, Emmett Mosley, and Mylan Graham?
Can I go higher than an A+?
I mean, can you say gap erased? Gap erased?
Super erased. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot of explosiveness and talent in that group, Ryan.
Sure is. I mean, Ryan Wingo, I think boundary or to the
Seth
field.
has everybody super fired up right now because that is one heck of a receiving class right there.
Man, that is, yeah. And they're all, I mean, most of them are like pretty versatile too players, Brian. Like, I mean, I think every one of those guys could play two different spots at wide receiver at least.
Yeah.
Like
And Ryan Wingo's the alpha. I mean, he's just a flat out alpha. Mylan Graham's your Kevin Stefferson, style wise. Emmett Mosley's your Avery Davis with more speed. Cam Williams is just that smooth operator. I mean, that's a really talented group. And you're absolutely right, Ryan. There's a lot of different types of skills in there and guys that can do different things. There's no doubt.
I like that you just dropped Kevin Stefferson with Mylan Graham. That was my comparison. I thought they were pretty similar players.
Yep. Archer 452 says Jabron Payne was a guy Ohio State kept an eye on, but ultimately never offered. Neither did Notre Dame actually until Dylan McCullough got. Well, they offered, but he didn't have a committable offer because of the injuries. Do you think he has a chance to push for significant playing time, or will he get passed up by guys in the 23 and 24 classes?
I think he has a chance to play. I just think I'm interested to see how they bring him along he's a 2022 guy, obviously. So we're talking about the 2022 season first. I'm interested to see how he is pulled along. Like I would hope it would be slowly just to make sure injuries and everything related, but he might be a guy that might have to play a little bit, right? With the lack of depth, obviously, with the injury to Jadarian Price and Logan Diggs coming back from injury. So I think he could play. It's going to be tough. I mean, there's going to be a lot of dudes in front of him over the next couple of years, but if he's able to get any type of role in 2022, I think that's big time for him. I'm just interested to see how the staff kind of brings him along, if I'm being honest.
So for me, it's hard for me to answer because I just don't know who he is as a player. And if he gets back to being a more mature version of the sophomore that we saw, he's got a chance to play because he's a really explosive back. He's elusive. He can catch the ball. I've compared him to Theo Riddick with a little bit more speed. That's a heck of a comparison. The problem is I don't know if that guy still exists. We've never seen it. He did not. He played one game as a junior and tore his knee up. And then last year he averaged like barely 4 yards a carry and had less than 300 yards rushing. I don't know if that guy still exists. If he still exists, Jabron Payne will play at Notre Dame. Of that, I have no doubt. He will play at Notre Dame. Will that be as a starter, as a role player? I don't know, but he will help at Notre Dame if he's healthy. I do believe that. It's hard for me to dive too much into it because I just don't know if he's still that guy. Because we just haven't seen it. I hope he is because they're going to need him. He's going to have to play some role this year, even if it's like the Dexter Williams role in 2015, where Dex got 20-some carries because he was once Torian Folsom got hurt, he was the third back.
Yeah.
And he had to play. And so you're going to see that from Jabron until Logan Diggs comes back.
Torian Folsom's injury still hurts my heart.
Yes, it does. He was that would have been such a backfield that year. Behind that line, oh my goodness. Whew. Archer 452 also says at the end of the season, where do the units rank nationally? So we'll make a prediction. Mm-hmm. So first, is Tyler Buckner a top 15 quarterback by the end of the season?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I agree. At the very least, he's a guy that we will be looking at as projecting as a top 15 guy going into 2023 at the very least, if
Mm-hmm.
he's the guy that we think he is. Is the O-line unit top 5? I think
By
it will
the end
be.
of the season, I say
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
By the end of the season,
it's a question. End of the season.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yes, I would say top 5. I think this offensive line is going to be very good. And I
And
think a
right
lot of
and
the go
I
ahead,
was going to
Ryan.
say preseason outlook when we did kind of the what was it Lindy's and
Yeah.
Athlon, like there was not a ton of really impressive offensive lines to
No,
start the
that's what I
year.
was getting ready to
So
say. A lot
yeah.
of the best offensive lines from recent years, Kentucky's an example that nobody talks about. We know Bama lost Evan Neal and different guys, but like a team like Kentucky, who's had a very underrated offensive line in recent years, they lost Aaron Kennard, they lost another kid that got drafted, and then they lost their offensive line coach to Bama.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of turnover at places. There's not a lot of like really impressive lines coming back to your point. So I don't think, I mean, heck, Lindy's had him ranked number 1. I mean, so there's already people predicting it coming into the year. So I think it will be. And sometimes it's preseason hype or whatever. Do the running backs or wide receivers rank in the top 10? Let's do them separately.
Together or
Let's do them
separate?
separately. Okay. Let's go running because I would say no at the receivers.
Yeah.
If we're not including Michael Mayer, I'd say no at receiver, but I don't think they have to be top 10. If all the other things are what we think they're going to be, they just need to be top 25 type of receivers. Because again, we're top 25, you're top 25 caliber team at that position. So I would say in your like 1 or 2 at tight end, right? I mean, their depth charts first or second, them or Georgia at tight end. I would say I'd give the advantage to Georgia right now because they're number 2 and 3 with Eric Gilbert and Darnell Washington are more proven than Notre Dame's 2 and 3. And talented players, but receiver I don't think is top 10, Ryan. I don't. It'll be good, but not top 10. Running backs, if they're healthy, that's a different story for me. And I'd say yes. Yes.
I mean, I said earlier in the show, I think that trio could be one of the best in college football if they all play to their abilities and are healthy. So yeah, I would say top 10 for sure.
All right, we're getting close to the end. So many great questions today, everybody. Jonathan Kazmarek, who is back. We haven't seen Jonathan in a while. Welcome back, Jonathan. Says, I would love to see Chris Tyree be involved in the passing game. Feed him passes out of the backfield and watch him fly. His speed is too much of a weapon to not be utilized in such a way. Ryan, this is why when we talk about Chris Tyree, I rarely use the word carries, and instead I use the word touches.
Yeah.
Touches includes all of it. Returns, carries, catches. And with Chris Tyree, you've got to look at him that way because as Jonathan said, and we saw it last year, that kid, when you get him in space or get him a step in the pass game, he is dynamic with the ball in his hands because of it.
100%.
I mean, first play of the game against Oklahoma State, Ryan, we talk about the 50-yard. That was the easiest reception touchdown he's ever had. Yeah. He caught the ball, and there was nothing in front of him for 50 yards. The first play where he turns a swing route that he catches behind the line into a 20-yard gain, that's the kind of stuff that Chris Tyree can bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I envision angle routes, option routes, swing screens. Again, I don't think that he's a guy, and I know people ask this all the time, that we're going to throw into the slot a ton. But as that mismatch weapon out of the backfield working against linebackers, absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's a big-time talent because, like Jonathan said, all you need to do is just give him a little bit of space. From there, he breaks angles, just breaks them. Like you need a perfect angle on Chris Tyree to be able to corral him heading toward the sideline. Like he is just going to, he's just a ridiculous athlete. So I agree. You need to get him involved. And you saw it already. I think you got a little bit of a preview in the Oklahoma State game as like, hey, this is going to be a guy in the passing game as well for us.
Yep. USMA 87. Can you provide some background on why Tyler Buckner changed his throwing motion? I can't tell you firsthand. I've never talked to Tyler, any of his family or anybody or coaches about it. My understanding of what people have told me that is the reason. So again, this is second-hand information, is that apparently the coach that worked with him in high school thought that there was some inaccuracy on shorter throws. His throwing motion created inaccuracy on shorter throws, so it was designed to create more accuracy on shorter throws. I never saw that, but that's what I was told as to why. And as I'll always say, I think that that one of the things that hurts a lot of kids is there's a ton of people there. Look, quarterback coaching has become a bit of a big business in sports. Sure and you're not going to pay someone hundreds and if not thousands of dollars to simply say, hey, you got good motion. Let's work out together and I'll make sure it stays clean. I don't need you for that, right? I've got to find a flaw that I can then address. And, that's how people like George Whitfield become what they are and what other people become. Not all. There's some really good quarterback coaches out there.
Sure are.
So I'm not trying to throw everybody under the bus. There's some really good quarterback coaches out there. They're just, and this is more true at the high school level than others. But it's like with anything. When something becomes like, wow, there's I can make a living doing that, then some people are going to exploit that and take advantage of that. And it's just not I'm not saying that happened with Tyler. It'd be my concern because I don't know his coach. It may not have been the case. He may have generally felt he had that problem, but that's always my danger. And the first thing I think of is like, there's too many people doing that I don't trust. Zach Nichols says, Brian, I have a question I've been meaning to ask you. I know you talk about gap closers and gap erasers. Have you considered adding a gap creators class? I'm thinking of last year's Reardon and Stace. Well, what we kind of talked about, Zach, and I love the thought process there. I love when people think about things like this. It's not that it's a gap creator because they didn't create the gap. It's more of like they're continuing to the gap, right? You're already there and you're just maintaining the gap, I guess is the way to say it, right? Like
gap maintainer,
gap maintainers, right? Because you've already got you're already that program, right? And now it's about maintaining that. And as being the best. But yeah, I mean, it's something to think about, but that's kind of like why I like the gap erasers. Cause it's more of just, I don't know, it's more fun that way. I like that. I like that idea, but I always think about that, but I appreciate, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say the gap erasers is like an underdog type of thing, right? Like we're erasing the gap. Let's get there type of thing.
Yes.
I respect it.
Yes. Yeah. I want to see that be more of a conversation in the future years, Zach. I think that's one thing we could definitely be fun to talk about is when it's having the conversation like, okay, where is that gap sort of already established and need to be maintained? I think tight end is one. I think offensive line was there and they have fallen off, and I think they'll quickly get back there. But I mean, to me, that's it really right now for Notre Dame. As far as just units, I mean, there's nobody has produced more dynamic linebackers in the last decade than Notre Dame. That's why there's only one team with 3 Butkus Award winners the last 10 years. The difference is Notre Dame has those 3 that could compete with anybody, but other teams have like 9.
Sure.
Right. There's a bigger gap. You know what I mean? Like Ryan, we talked about like the 5 guys that we talked about, like there's a big drop off after the top 5 or 6 guys, 100%. And even then number 4 for us is a guy that was a 4th round pick in the NFL draft. It's a good player. I was
going to say there's a pretty,
top 3.
I was going to say after the 3rd guy, there's a little bit of a gap if we're being honest. Like if we're tiering it, it's like top 3, then there's a gap between 3 and 4, and then there's another gap between 4 and 5, and then there's a huge gap after 5 if we're being honest. So
Agree. Salty Virginia Peanuts says with wide receiver positional flexibility, can Notre Dame bait a defensive personnel set and then use tempo to keep the defense from substituting while receivers change? So I'll just be real clear. As long as the receivers aren't switching who the receivers are. So like anytime you bring a new person onto the field, the defense by rule is given an opportunity to rotate or substitute to the point where officials will stand over the ball and say you can't snap it until they look over, and if they don't make a change, then you move on. But to his point, I believe his question is more geared towards within the same personnel grouping, the same 3 receivers on the field. So in that regard, Ryan, why don't you answer the question? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page from the context of it.
Yeah, as long as you're keeping the same players on the field, you don't have to let that substitution happen like Brian's saying. So yeah, you could obviously pick up that tempo and you can really force, especially if you get them in the wrong, even if they substitute and they bring in maybe the incorrect substitution that they wanted, kind of with some hindsight to it, you could definitely get them into some bad situations. And it's your unlock. It doesn't even have to be just that it's the 3 receivers. You could keep the same set, but then you're running different types of plays out of it. You're working the RPO game. You're doing different types of things. So yeah, as long as you are not allowing a substitution, you can tempo them to death at that point.
Yeah, so very good answer, Ryan, to that. So that is going to do it, everybody, for today's show. Great questions today. Great questions. We had a question from Irish Chi-Town about the draft. We're not going to get to that. That we actually had a show on that. We'll get to that another time, Irish Chi-Town. We got to get rolling here. Lots of great questions, a lot of great interaction. Thanks, everybody, for being with us today. 6 o'clock tonight, so 2 hours from tonight. Make sure that you don't miss out on what we've got going on tonight. Obviously, Vince is going to be hosting Irish Breakdown Sports Talk at 6 o'clock. He and I will actually be on the show together tonight. So since Sean is out of town, Vince is going to have me on, and we're going to talk some Notre Dame football. So you're going to want to be there in 2 hours. That's why we kind of got to get rolling here, because I've got to recover this a little bit and then grab some food so we can get ready. So for Vince and I tonight at 6 o'clock, we're going to talk some Notre Dame football. I got to get with him on what his topics are. I'm not quite sure what he wants to talk about tonight. So we'll talk Notre Dame football tonight at 6 o'clock. So everybody else may say, Kay nailed it. Join the message board, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave a 5-star review, visit the Irish Breakdown store for cool merch like this. Ryan is rocking no merch today, but he does have the flag in the background, which can be found in the store as well. And as always, go Irish. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. We'll hopefully see all of you again here in about 2 hours for me and Vince. And Vince is always around. He's always around. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.